Good evening, everyone. I'm Councilman Ed Rice-Singer, the Chairman of the Land Use and Transportation Committee. I welcome everyone to the City Council chambers. The one rule that I do have is that could you please turn off your cell phones or put them on vibrate to give respect and courtesy to those who are going to testify. We are here for City Council Bill 18-0306. Health Code Clean Air Regulation. The purpose of the bill is to regulate the emissions from commercial solid waste incinerators, defining certain terms, requiring the continuous monitoring of certain pollutants, setting emissions limits for certain pollutants, requiring the production and public disclosure of certain emission reports, requiring commercial solid waste incinerators to allow certain inspections, establishing a certification process for air monitoring contractors, setting certain penalties, setting special effective dates, and generally relating to clean air regulations. I'm just going to say a few words, and I'm going to keep it brief because there's a lot of people who want to testify, and we have a panel, we got agency reports. So I just want to say the purpose and the intent of this bill is two words: clean air. We want clean air in the city of Baltimore for our residents, the citizens, and the businesses, and those people who are visiting the city of Baltimore. We have two companies that have incinerators, and it's known that Baltimore is the waste incinerator capital of the world. A fact is, in over 20 years, over 2,300 incinerators have been replaced by safer alternatives. The other thing is that DPW, I speak to them, is that they have to develop a plan, a better plan to recycle. They've known about this. It just seems that DPW is one of those agencies that you have to keep on beating up on, kicking butt in order for them to come through with some sort of plan. I'm not being rude, it's just a fact. And I just want to end by saying that our intention isn't to close anybody down. What we want is for you to clean up. You have alternatives. Either you clean up your companies or you close down. That's how I feel. So thank you. At this time, I'm going to introduce my colleagues. To my far left is Councilman Brandon Scott. Second to my left is Councilwoman Mary Pat Clark. To my immediate left is the Vice President of the Council and also Vice Chair of the Committee, Councilwoman Sharon Green Middleton. Thank you. To my far right is Councilman Leon Pinkett. To his left is Councilman Eric Costello. To his left is Councilman Robert Stokes. And to my right is my staff person to the committee, Jennifer Coates. We also have Rebecca Simmons, who's the legal counsel for President Jack Young's office. That's it. Liam. Okay. And we also have, with the mayor's office, we have Liam Davis from President Jack Young's office, and we also have from Mayor Catherine Pugh's office, Jeff Amoris is with us. Okay, so that takes care of that, right? So we're going to start off with the agency reports. And we'll start with, before the law department, I just want to remind everyone that if you want to testify, there's testify sheets in the back. If you want to testify, mark it, check mark. Whether you're for or against, make sure that you check that off, and if you want to testify. So at this time, Department of Law. Yeah, you can use that. Go ahead.
Good evening. I'm Vic Turvola from the City Law Department. The Law Department believes that you have ample authority to pass this particular bill. We know there's some opposition to whether you have it. We've taken a good look at it, and we think there's ample authority to adopt this bill.
Okay, so you come up with a favorable report?
Stand by the report.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for the Law Department? No? Thank you. Environmental Control Board. You would state your name, please.
Absolutely. Brittany Vendries, Deputy Director of the Environmental Control Board. Per our response, we have no objection to the passage of the bill. We don't think there'll be any significant impact for our agency, at least.
Okay. Any questions for the committee? No? Thank you.
Thank you.
Health Department. Make sure you
Mr. Chair.
state your name.
My name is DePaul Nibber. I'm the Director of Legislative Affairs for the Health Department. Apologies. Is that better? Yeah. Okay. I'm actually joined here by our Chief Medical Advisor, Dr. Shelley Chu, and also our partnership expert for the asthma program at the Baltimore City Health Department, Ms. Margaret Schnitzer. Would you like me to go into our testimony, or would you like for us?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'd like to also thank you, Mr. Chair, for including us in the process in constructing this bill. It was incredibly helpful for the Health Department to have that sort of input. And I'd also like to thank the opponents and proponents around this bill, because they have brought an incredible amount of information to our attention. And based on the balance of what we received, we support the bill. And before I go into the reasons why, I'd like to acknowledge that we're not environmental engineers, we're not waste disposal experts, but we are public health experts. We have physicians on staff, we have nurses on staff, we have epidemiologists on staff, and in consulting them, they favor this bill. We're charged with identifying public health risks and protecting the public against them. And everyone that I've talked to has identified asthma and other air pollution related diseases as an epidemic in this city. So with respect to just asthma, we do what we can. We conduct outreach, we conduct home visits to identify potential asthma triggers within the home. We even offer assistance on how to best take your prescriptions. But we can't do everything around what might cause an asthma attack. So the things that we need more protection around are things like outdoor pollution, the things that our kids are exposed to every day as soon as they leave their home. And to kind of speak to that, I'm going to bring up Dr. Shelley Chu, who can talk about some of the actual substances these kids are exposed to and the particular health effects surrounding them.
Thank you, Chairman Reisinger, Vice Chair Middleton, and members of the committee on this really important legislation. Council Bill 180306 would help safeguard our city residents, especially those who are the most vulnerable. And those are the ones with chronic diseases. It's our newborns and young children, but it's really about the clean air for all residents, as Chairman Reisinger has said. My name is Dr. Chu. I'm the Senior Medical Advisor, and I am joined today by other members of the Health Department, including those who are sitting on the balcony, and then Margaret Schnitzer, who is in charge of our community asthma program. And we are in favor of this bill because it would require more stringent monitoring and reporting processes for commercial solid waste incinerators in Baltimore. And as a doctor and public health official, I wanted to talk about some of the health effects of some of the particles that are emitted. So one of the particles that can be emitted is dioxin, and that's a chemical that's created during a burning process. And these particles can travel long distances, up to hundreds of kilometers, and they can persist in the environment for over 50 to 100 years. And they have been associated with several conditions, including birth defects, diabetes, developmental disabilities, reproductive disorders, cancers. And dioxins have also been associated with damaging the immune system. The World Health Organization also recommends that we need to decrease current background exposure, and one of the ways to do so is to strictly monitor the processes. Commercial solid incinerators are also responsible for emitting various heavy metals such as arsenic, cadmium, chromium, mercury, and lead. And according to the WHO, these metals also persist in the environment and they also accumulate. And they're associated with different health conditions. So arsenic is associated with throat and lung irritation and skin changes. Long-term exposure to chromium can affect breathing and affect your kidney or liver. And health effects from mercury include lung and eye irritation, and high amounts can cause nausea and vomiting, diarrhea, and affect development in children. Zinc can irritate the throat when inhaled, cause breathing problems, and lead to lung or heart damage. And these are just some of the health conditions that I mentioned today. And there are additional particles that are emitted that can have downstream consequences on our residents, both for adults and children. And because of the potential negative health effects associated with solid waste incinerator emissions, the Health Department urges a favorable report on this bill. I'll now turn it over to my colleague, Margaret Schnitzer.
I just have one question, and I'll open up to my committee members. And in regards to the emissions, I mean, some of the two businesses that's in question we have a concern with, they're stating that they're close to those emissions, but it's still, you say stringent emissions. I mean, it's still, even if they get to what the MDE may say or EPA, it's still, are you saying that it's still a health hazard? That's why I'm asking you an issue.
Can
you answer that? If you can't, then I can understand.
From our standpoint is that because some of these particles, they accumulate over long periods of time, and there needs to be additional studies as well, but actually studying these types of emissions and how you measure them in your body. It's actually very, very hard, and you do not want to do a clinical trial about this. So a lot of the studies are either epidemiological studies or looking at the impact of workers who work in these areas. And so they are very, very difficult to study. But I think from our standpoint, as from the Public Health Department, is that there is a risk, and because these particles, they accumulate over long periods of time, we're not too sure. So we must pursue the precautionary principle where if there is a detriment to the health of our residents, then we have to ensure that there are standards and strict monitoring in place.
So even it's not just the residents or the businesses or the visitors, the city of Baltimore come into the city, it's also, some of them are here tonight, the people that work for these two companies, they're subject to the same concern. Oh,
absolutely, and there needs to be standards in place, especially if you're maintaining the equipment as well.
Okay. Thank you. Any questions from the committee? No? Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, Madam Vice Chair, and members of the committee. My name is Margaret Schnitzer, and I'm the Director of the Community Asthma Program at the Baltimore City Health Department. As many of you are aware, asthma is a chronic disease of the lungs that's characterized by swollen and very sensitive airways. And these airways react to triggers, and these triggers make it hard to breathe. According to the HSCRC, in 2014, Baltimore City children made over 4,500 emergency room visits, pediatric emergency room visits for asthma as a primary diagnosis, and over 11,000 visits in which asthma was a contributing factor. Asthma is believed to be a major contributor to school absenteeism and for young kids to get behind in their schoolwork. When looking at asthma prevalence and morbidity, we see substantial disparities related to race, gender, and socioeconomic status. In 2017, 33% of Baltimore City high school students reported an asthma diagnosis, and that's compared to 26% across the state. A 2012 report from the State Health Department that measured average mortality from asthma shows that Baltimore City's mortality rate between 2006 and 2010 was more than 2 times the state average. These statistics and others make it clear that Baltimore City carries a heavy asthma burden. To give a little background, an asthma trigger is anything that causes an asthma exacerbation or an asthma attack. These triggers are allergens like pollen and mold, or cockroach or mouse droppings, irritants, which can be tobacco smoke and also include air pollution, or other factors such as weather or stress. The bill under consideration would severely limit the nitrogen dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and particulate matter, all of which are significant contributors to airway irritation. Multiple scientific studies have shown an association between these pollutants and increased asthma symptoms. A recent analysis of 87 studies concluded that air pollutants, including fine particulate matter and larger particulate matter, were associated with significantly increased risk of asthma hospitalizations. This association was strongest for children and the elderly. A recent study in California found that asthma symptoms were made worse by exposure to air pollution, and that increased air pollution was associated with increased airway inflammation and even had a negative impact on lung development. Other studies have linked exposure to air pollution, specifically nitrogen dioxide and ozone, to new onset of asthma, not just the worsening of existing asthma. In zip code 21225, asthma hospitalization sharply decreased by 57% between 2009 and 2013, far exceeding the citywide decrease in asthma hospitalizations. While no specific study was conducted, the consensus is that this decrease was significantly influenced by pollution control technology upgrades at 2 coal-fired plants located in the neighboring zip code in Baltimore County of 21226. These changes decrease the sulfur oxides and particulate matter emissions. It's thought to, these changes and earlier changes that had decreased the nitrogen oxide emissions is thought to contribute to the marked decrease in hospitalizations related to asthma. State-of-the-art air pollution controls should be required for all air pollution sources in the Baltimore region. The message is clear. Pollution is harmful for our most vulnerable people with asthma. Thank you for your time, and I welcome any questions.
Any questions from committee? No, thank you. Public Works, it's my understanding that they're on their way from Annapolis. So at this time, do we have anyone from the Commission on Sustainability wants to testify?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is Lisa McNeely from the Office of Sustainability.
We received your report, but go ahead.
Yes, and so on behalf of the Commission on Sustainability, we stand by our report.
Okay, just to, regards to the report, their framework and intent of the bill addresses a goal of the Baltimore Sustainability Plan as approved by City Council on March the 2nd, 2009. Pollution prevent goal, improve Baltimore's air quality, and eliminate code red days. I just want to say that there are 16 members that attended the meeting, that 16 was in favor and 1 abstained. Am I correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Kristen testify. She'll go.
So Kristen, you're going to testify for DPW?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kristen Oldendorf on behalf of the Department of Public Works. So DPW's focus in this legislation is really around operations, waste collection and disposal. We collect waste from households throughout Baltimore City as well as small businesses. And it's our responsibility to dispose of that waste in a way that meets all federal and state regulations and laws, and also to be as fiscally responsible as we can. The Bureau of Solid Waste is funded through the city's general fund. We consistently promote recycling with our residents. We have our Drive to 35 recycling campaign, and are always trying to increase the amount of material that is recycled, and more importantly, to try to get residents to reduce the amount of waste that they are producing in the first place. We're very committed to recycling, although the markets right now worldwide are difficult. Many municipalities have stopped accepting certain materials or even stopped recycling altogether. But that aside, we're very committed to recycling and encourage everybody to recycle. Every single person produces waste. Obviously, the people in this in these chambers care about the waste they produce and how it's disposed of. Unfortunately, the vast majority of people, they take their waste out to the curb, they put it there, it gets collected, they never think about it again. But it's our responsibility to make sure that, ideally waste isn't dumped somewhere. In a lot of the world, they don't have the infrastructure we have, and waste is not disposed of properly. But all of this gets down to behavior change, and that's not unique to Baltimore. That's an issue everywhere, getting people to change behavior and reduce the amount of waste produced and to promote recycling and so on. We also are in the very early stages of a master plan, which will be a long-term master plan. The beginnings of this will have a study, doing a waste sort to see what kind of waste is getting produced and to work with stakeholders and communities to see kind of what the priorities are and to have more of a long-term plan around our waste collection and disposal and reducing the amount of waste produced and diverting as much waste as we can from landfills and waste energy facilities. So we look forward to the results of that study. However, we know that as much as we can do to reduce the amount of waste produced, there will always be something left. You can increase recycling and composting, but there will always be a portion, at least probably in our lifetimes, that we will still need to find a solution for. So currently, the majority of the city's waste does go to the Bresco Waste Energy Facility, which would be subject to the proposed legislation. So we just need to be thinking, for our department's perspective, from a financial and operational standpoint, worst case scenario, what would happen if we needed to find a new disposal method for that waste, because our landfill only has so much capacity. So that's kind of our standpoint, is looking at the cost impacts if we needed to, instead of sending the majority of the waste to the waste energy facility, figuring out what would the alternative be and what would the cost impacts of that be. Currently, our disposal facilities are located within city boundaries, so it doesn't require a lot of long transportation. But if we had to go outside of city boundaries to dispose of that waste, there would be a cost impact to somehow transporting it farther, and that would be a fiscal impact. This bill was not referred to finance. This would probably be more appropriate for them to speak to, but I'll just mention that the Bresco Waste Energy Facility pays certain fees and taxes to the city, and that all goes to the general fund. And the city accepts ash from the waste energy facility for disposal at the landfill, and we have sort of a discounted tipping fee for our waste disposal at the waste energy facility. So that's pretty much our department's report. We're really thinking operationally about the waste that we currently dispose of at this facility and what were to happen if we needed to divert that to another facility. Okay, thank you.
Kirsten, we have Councilman Scott. You have a question? And then it's Councilman Costello.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for allowing a non-committee member to ask a question. And Mr. Chair, as you know, I support your efforts and I support what you're doing, but you also know that open and transparent government is very important to me. And I think, and as you know, I'm a connoisseur of legislation. So just in research, when I looked up the Senate bill last year that dealt with this same topic, I saw specific numbers in reference to what the city will be responsible for if that law passed, which is very similar to what you're doing here today. And I think that for me, what I'm most upset about is that DPW knows those numbers, yet they didn't put those in their report. And when you read the last line of their report, it just says the Department of Public Works wishes to point out that any interim or long-term impact of enacting City Council Bill 18-306 will require the redirection of funding to effectively manage refuse in a safe manner. But you can clearly just look, and they know because they were there, and actually at the bottom of this, the contact person is Ms. Deal from the mayor's office, that it says $50 million in the first year, $20 million in the years thereafter. And what that does to you and my colleagues is that it puts you in the point where you don't have all the information. And I think that what we have to start having from DPW, especially with DPW and their director, we just had the same thing with the water bill raise. They give out partial information and decisions are made, and then after the fact, information has to be cleaned up. And Mr. Ambrose, for you as well, if we know that information, allow my colleagues to have all the information so they can make the best informed decision for our citizens, because we want them to be breathing healthy, clean air, but at least allow them to have every piece of information possible. And I think that I can't be more clear in that, because that consistently happens with Director Child and DPW.
Thank you, Councilman. It was a sad report. As far as I'm concerned, we have Councilman Costello.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And if it'd be possible, if you would kindly indulge me with going past the 2-question limit, but I suspect they'll all be very quick.
Could I ask that Kirsten
When
stand
you're
up while she's answering so we can all hear? Krista?
To the podium, yeah.
Yeah.
Make sure you use the microphone. We're televised.
So,
Costello?
thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Oldendorf, the agency comments letter doesn't state what DPW's position is on this bill. What is the department's position?
Okay. All right, thank you. I suppose our position would be no objection. We just want to make sure the council is aware of the fiscal impacts. And to Councilman Scott's point, the state legislature, they assign fiscal notes, not for every bill, of course, but for certain bills that they feel like may have a significant impact on different municipalities, they assign a fiscal note. So this is different from, a testimony or something like that. It actually has specific questions about cost impacts, revenue that wouldn't be received or additional costs. So we do our very best, even if it's not exact numbers, to answer those fiscal reports to the best of our ability. So the report that the councilman referenced from legislation introduced last year was that. In the numbers listed, we explained in the text of that fiscal note that it would assume that if this were to pass and the waste energy facility decided to close, these were more or less cost estimates based to our best knowledge of what it would cost for additional drivers, trailers, trucks, a transfer station, estimated tipping fees, based on different scenarios of what we would do with the waste, because it's not, there's no one predetermined, I guess, conclusion of what that would be. We would need to really kind of study what makes the most sense for the city, and that would not be our department in isolation. That would really require conversations with finance. So that's to the fiscal report, was really kind of looking at different scenarios of what would happen, where would that waste be disposed of. So we did not include those in the bill report for the city council, because traditionally it's not, our council bill reports aren't that detailed kind of fiscal analysis, and it would also be kind of different scenarios depending on what we decided if it came to that. So this is really about air quality, so we didn't want to jump to, this whole solid waste fiscal analysis, since the intent of the bill is around air quality. So that's why we left it just kind of stated within the bill that yes, there would be fiscal impacts. These are some current numbers, but not going into all those details, because that didn't seem like the full intent of this legislation.
So, Kristen, you're someone I consider a personal friend. You live in my district. I think extremely highly of you professionally, but I have to disagree vehemently with your response. The fact that we're not shown the same deference as the General Assembly, when at the end of the day it's going to be Baltimore City that's going to have to foot the bill for this, is very frustrating. And we as a council need to do a better job in general of understanding the fiscal impact of legislation that's being proposed, no matter who the sponsor is, whether it's the administration or any council member. And looking at the local fiscal impact note for Senate Bill 732, there is a $118 million impact over fiscal year 20 through 23. And the last sentence in DPW's letter here says the Department of Public Works wishes to point out that any interim or long-term impact of enacting City Council Bill 18-0306 will require the redirection of funding to effectively manage mixed refuse in a safe manner. DPW is the one that opened the door to the discussion of the fiscal impact and made this more about fiscal impact than about the health impacts. So to me, it's very frustrating that the department is not taking a position. It's very frustrating that the department is not sharing with the council what the fiscal impact is, that myself and my colleagues had to hunt around all day to find Senate Bill 732 local fiscal impact note, which isn't available online, and had to reach out to our state senators and delegates as well as the mayor's office to track down that information. I'm of the mindset that this city council deserves to have that type of fiscal information when considering something of this magnitude. And that's not, I'm not indicating support or opposition or anything of the matter to the bill. I don't understand how the city council can be expected to make a decision of this magnitude without having that information ready at our fingertips. That is a problem that needs to be corrected moving forward, and I plan to address that during the budget process this year with my colleagues. We need to have that information, otherwise we can't make decisions when we're following he said, she said, and there's been a lot of that during this process. And I hope that moving forward, DPW will be receptive to those comments and ensure that we get that type of detailed fiscal analysis when we are deliberating these types of bills in the future, especially one of this magnitude. The next piece is, Mr. Chair, if I may continue, you mentioned a plan that's underway. What's the, a study, I'm sorry, what's the end date for completion on that? And I apologize if I missed that.
Yes, thank you, Councilman, and I appreciate your comments, and I agree we need to do better at explaining fiscal impacts of bills, and I apologize that we did not include more of that within our bill response.
And before you answer that, I'd like to interrupt respectfully for a moment. The onus isn't just on DPW, it's also on the mayor's office, it's also on the Department of Finance. I don't know if DPW reached out to the Department of Finance. I know that this bill was referred to certain agencies by the Council President's office, but it should have been on DPW at some point along the way, even with the $9 million impact, or whatever it is, $8.8 million that we pay Bresco, and the additional $2.5 million that Bresco returns to the city for ash disposal, and then the $7.3 million total. That alone should have been enough to trigger a fiscal impact note or some type of agency comment letter from the Department of Finance. So moving forward, I would really like to see that. It is absolutely critical to our work, and again, we cannot make decisions of this magnitude without having that information at our fingertips. So on to the following question. The study was to be completed by when?
Yes, the study is projected to be completed by the end of this year.
Calendar 2019?
Calendar year.
And what's the scope of that study? Very
so,
generally speaking.
Yes, generally it includes waste sorts, which kind of gives you a baseline idea of what kind of waste you're getting and where it's coming from, as well as recycling sorts to get, same with recycling. It will also include public meetings to get input on, to help us get a sense of if we had a new program, would residents take advantage of it? Would they support it? What kind of things would residents and other stakeholders in the city like to see happen regarding solid waste? It would also be looking at what are the alternatives, what are different kind of programs we can do to divert waste, to reuse, recycle, and come up with some basically suggestions for some of these alternatives.
At the end of DPW's letter, again, I'll read the last clause, will require the redirection of funding to effectively manage mixed refuse in a safe manner. Does DPW have a proposal for where that funding would come from?
Currently, it's funded by the general fund.
I understand, but it would require a redirection, which means we either need to identify a new revenue source or cut an existing revenue stream. So does DPW at this point have any recommendations as to where those dollars would come from?
I would not be in a position to say how the budget should be set for the city.
Jeff, do we have anyone from Department of Finance or Bureau of Budget and Management Research here?
No, but I will reach out.
Okay.
I doubt I'll be able to get someone here tonight, but I'll reach out immediately.
Yeah, this is a big part of this discussion, and to not have them here to answer those questions for the council, again, leaves us in the dark as we're trying to, get answers to these questions. So once that report is completed in December of 2019, regardless of this proposed legislation, what is the next step on DPW's end?
To look at the results of the report, determine priorities for what we would want to implement when, come up with some timelines and sort of an implementation plan, and of course discuss funding for anything that would require additional funding.
And last question, Mr. Chairman, and I'm probably going to come back after. Thank you for indulging me, sir. This agency comments report clearly focuses on the Bresco facility, but does not focus on, I believe it's Curtis Bay Energy, CBE, we'll call it. Do we have any idea of what the impact is going to be on our healthcare anchor institutions in the city, as well as what not only the fiscal cost, but what the environmental side effects of them taking that medical waste outside of the city is going to be during the process?
Yes, sir, that was not addressed in the report because we do not directly, again, we're looking from a DPW perspective, what do we do with the waste we collect? So I wouldn't want to speak to that. I just happen to know that they do accept waste from many hospitals and other medical facilities throughout the region.
One last thing for health. Yeah, go ahead.
And thank you, Chris. And the last thing is for the health department. Has the health department talked to any of our hospital anchor institutions to discuss what type of impact this is going to have on them?
Short answer is no. Yeah, use the microphone.
Councilman, we have not spoken to any of those institutions. It is not something that we're talking about things from either an operational standpoint or from an impact to residents' health. So to consider what would happen to private businesses is kind of beyond our purview.
You wouldn't agree that there's an environmental impact from hospitals having to transport that medical waste outside of the city, and that's not in the interest of public health?
There could potentially be an impact. Again, we're focusing on Baltimore City, so once it leaves Baltimore City, we can't really speak with any sort of authority on it.
Understood. We have hospitals in the downtown core of the city, Mercy Hospital, University of Maryland Medical System, both downtown and midtown campus. I would genuinely appreciate if the health department tomorrow would make contact with those institutions to begin an in-depth discussion of what the impacts, not only from a fiscal perspective, but an environmental perspective, but most importantly from an operational perspective, are going to be. And if you could circle back, Mr. Chairman, if it's okay, if he could circle back with the committee by the end of the week with the results of those conversations.
Once we get the information, I get it. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Councilman. Before we go further, Kristen, I just want to say that the questions or statements that's coming out of the committee, it's not directly to you.
Yes, sir.
The years I've been here, I am totally upset with Director Rudy Chow. I think my colleague Costello used the word magnitude. The magnitude of this legislation and the issue it has for the citizens of Baltimore and the two businesses, that he is not here. He should be here. And this ain't the first time that he's disrespected the council, that I know that Councilman Leon Pinkett had legislation in regards to the reservoir, and he did not show up for that. So I say to Jeff M. Morse from the mayor's office that he is the director, and if we got questions that's at that magnitude, and we want to have answers to our questions, and especially the position of DPW, he should be here. So I will have that conversation with him. I'll see him tomorrow at the Planning Commission, but I just want that passed on to the administration. At this time, Councilman Stokes.
I just want to mention, and my colleague, Councilman Costello, I'm really disappointed because I'm reading the report and I didn't see DPW, whether you're in support of this piece of legislation. Your report mentions an anticipated increase in trash and suggests we would have to send trash to outside facilities, increase costs as a result. What efforts is DPW making to increase recycling and alternative methods of trash disposal?
Councilman Stokes, thank you for that question. It is very important that we increase our recycling and reduce the amount of waste produced in the first place. So the master plan that is underway will go a long way toward coming up with a long-term plan to doing so. In the interim, we have many educational activities to try to educate residents about why it is important to recycle and how to do so. So our community liaisons go out to meetings, special events throughout the year. They visit schools. We have educational information of many varieties, social media and our websites and the calendar and flyers and handouts, and we do talks. So educating residents as much as we can. We also work closely with Be More Beautiful on these efforts and our nonprofit partners.
Well, unfortunately, I done heard that a whole bunch of times. What is the timeline? Because I go to a lot of community meetings. I hear nothing from DPW about recycling. I go to schools. I don't hear nobody from DPW coming to school to tell young people how to recycle. So it's the same old story over and over. So what is the timeline in terms of rolling out this recycling? Because if we don't get this done, we ain't gonna have enough room in this landfill to put this trash and this recycling. So I think DPW need to come up with a timeline and not keep coming here talking, oh, we got this, we rolling this, we go to these meetings, we go there. I go to meetings, go to school. I don't see nobody from DPW say nothing about recycling or engaging people or young people about recycling. No brochure, nothing. So when is the timeline gonna start? Because it's been going on since I've been on the council, 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, it's all underway. I wouldn't say there's a timeline. It's continuous. It's every day. It's every hour. We're always trying to promote recycling. If you have suggestions of schools or neighborhoods that you think would benefit from having us come talk about recycling, we would be happy to do so. Because we need the help of everybody here to help spread this message. Behavior change, as I said, is very challenging and is not unique to Baltimore City.
I've said this to Mr. Rudy. I've said this to Rudy Child a whole lot of times, so it's not a new conversation.
I agree.
At this time, Councilwoman, thank you, Councilman. This time, Councilwoman Clark.
Whoa. Thank you very much, Ms. Oldendorf, for being here on behalf of the Department of Public Works. I'm listening to my colleagues, and I think they're saying very important things. But I'm also realizing, again, why I'm a supporter of this legislation for clean air and why that's what we're here about tonight. And that unless and until we do this, no one will have a schedule, no one will have a budget, no one will, except the private sector incinerators who are given deadlines within this legislation. And those deadlines become ours. Because each deadline that we meet, the first one being in 2020, around the mitigation of certain chemicals going out of these stacks, and then another in 4 years later, 2 years later. Those deadlines in the private sector set the deadlines in the public sector, And they also force the budgeting that is only now referenced and not together. Because that's why we're doing this. We're doing this because to move the city to adopt accelerated recycling that makes sense, where we can actually market it and use it in a way that matters, and for answering these problems that are referenced about hauling our trash out of the city. Well, really? Nothing's going to really get done until we here in this council and the mayor and city council say, we will have clean air in this city. We will ask our 2 major incinerators to meet standards or close. And we will be prepared as we follow those same deadlines to know what we're doing. And it's just like being in school. Unless you know when the book report is due, you don't know what you're going to do in the 48 hours before that. Life is like that. We have a lot of needs. We have priorities. We're saying make this a priority and find the way to do it, city, and find the way to do it, private sector. It's for the health of Baltimore and the individuals as well as the entire city. So come back when we know what the deadlines are that we are as connected with as the 2 incinerators. And then we'll expect plans to be developing with budgets to go with them. But I know from experience that if we don't do this, we won't have the motivation on the public side to do everything else that we need to accommodate what we're demanding here in this legislation of the private sector. That was not a question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. I just want to acknowledge Councilman Z. Cohen and also Councilman Yitzi Slifer. Councilman Pinkett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not certain if you said this, Kristen, but what's the current rate of recycling in the city?
20%.
We've been going back and forth with MDE about the numbers from last year, so I'm not positive if they reached the final numbers. We can get back to you with that information.
So what's the goal for
this
percentage?
State requires a 35% recycling rate. That includes certain credits and things, but 35%.
Okay. But okay, so you'll get back to me. And does anybody know what the 20%? 20%. 14%. Thank you.
No, it's definitely been more than that.
Okay.
It's more like
I'm sorry, I shouldn't have asked
30,
anybody
I believe.
else. So I just have another quick question. You mentioned earlier about the DPW's initiating the study on how, or analysis on how we're going to manage our waste stream. So is a part, has that study taken into consideration this piece of legislation? Or once we make a decision on this, are you going to have to start the study all over again?
Well, the study's in its very early stages. However, the legislation itself doesn't determine anything. I mean, we don't know what we don't know what the impacts of the legislation would be. That's outside kind of the realm of our power. It's a privately run facility, so I don't know what the impacts would be.
I guess I'm just saying that in the study, are you considering all of the options that either Bresco can, if this was to pass, that Bresco can bring their systems in line with the emission limits, or that Bresco would not be an option, or
Yes, the study is looking at all the alternatives, all the, like, what are all the alternatives for disposing of the waste within the city. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other council members have a question or statement? No? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Kristen. At this time, there is a, regards to the advocates, the supporters of this legislation, they have a panel. So if the panel wants to come forward. So how many members do you have?
5 if they're all here.
Okay, so they could sit here. Yeah, I just let me just say this. We have Mike.
Okay.
If you want them all across, you might.
Kevin. Oh, no, you're not on the panel. You're later. James is in your place. No, you are there, James. He's not on the panel. He'll be up later. James is on the panel.
Yeah, Mike, before you begin, I just want to say that I'm requesting that for the rule is that we have a lot of people that's going to testify and to try to have the panel to at least 3 minutes, no more, so not to be too redundant. And we do have a time up here, so what I also want to say to the general public and everyone that I did ask those representatives from those companies, especially Wheelabrator, if they wanted to do a panel, and they declined. They said they got testimony. So I just want everyone to understand that we just didn't say there's a panel for one group and not a panel for the other. So go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Mike Ewall. I'm the founder and director of Energy Justice Network. We're a national organization, and we've been doing a lot of work here in Baltimore over the past several years. And just want to thank everyone on the council and all the folks, all the agencies and others who have supported this so far, including the 35 organizations that are signed on in support. The Baltimore Clean Air Act, the idea of it is to address the fact that we have 2 large polluters here, 2 of the biggest incinerators of their type in the country, the largest trash incinerator in Maryland, Wheelabrator Baltimore, and the largest medical waste incinerator in the whole country, Curtis Bay Energy. And without getting into all the details on the pollution levels, as you heard some on that already, I just want to point out that what this law does is basically just bring things up to current standards and current technology. Right now, they'll tell you, oh, we have continuous emissions monitors. We know what's coming out of our smokestack. And you hear that all the time as the refrain. But the fact is that these companies don't know what's coming out of their smokestack for most pollutants most of the time. They test a few things continuously. The rest of them they test once a year, if at all. And I liken that to if we let motorists drive around all year with no speedometer for the rest of these pollutants, and once a year we set a speed trap on the highways where there are signs that say, slow down, speed trap ahead, warning. And then the brother of the driver is running the speed trap because the companies do their own testing. So we need an independent entity that could make sure that for this ordinance, 20 different pollutants will be continuously monitored, put on a website real time for the world to see, like residents of Montgomery County get to appreciate in their incinerator, and set the most protective standards available that are already being met in other communities in this country. Now, earlier there were statements about where the medical waste will go, if the hospitals didn't get to send it to Curtis Bay Energy should they choose to close down instead of comply with this law. And I did the research on this. I used numbers from the Maryland Department of the Environment, and I showed that right next door at Stericycle, next door to Curtis Bay Energy, they have autoclaves, a non-burn technology. So does another company in the city called Daniels, another non-burn technology called an autoclave. And if Curtis Bay Energy were to close, these other 2 facilities have enough unused capacity at their autoclaves to handle 20 times the amount of waste that Baltimore generators of medical waste send to Curtis Bay Energy. And they actually have enough to take the waste from all 20 states that feed Curtis Bay Energy could still come to Baltimore to these other facilities using non-burn safer technology. So that's why over 6,000 of these have shut down in the past few decades, including 23 medical waste incinerators in Baltimore, because they're not needed and they're safer and cleaner alternatives. And same thing with the municipal waste. 10 seconds, okay. There are definitely alternatives for municipal waste, and I outlined that in a memo I shared. I'm happy to answer any questions on this legislation. I think I've done more research on this than maybe anyone in the room, so happy to answer any questions. Thank you. Mateo, you want to come up?
Yeah. I'd rather see the panel go.
Okay. Should we all go and then questions?
Yeah, who's next?
Okay. Mateo, let's give you in the chance.
Hello, Mateo Colombi with
you need a microphone. You should stand up.
Do you want to come up here?
Sure. No
It's better to stand when you're talking.
We'll play musical chairs.
And then everybody can hear you better.
Shorter than Mr. Ewald. So, Mateo Colombi, here on behalf of the Teamsters Union, and I'm here to deliver a comment, on behalf of Dennis Taylor, who's Joint Council 62 President here in Baltimore, and also for Ron Herrera, who heads the Waste and Recycling Division at the Teamsters. Waste is a strategic sector of the economy, often overlooked and in dire need of reform. And we urge Baltimore to start that reform by creating good jobs in the waste sector. The best way to create more jobs while building a more sustainable way to handle our waste stream is to implement a zero waste policy. And in June 2017, Baltimore City Council passed resolutions that call for city action towards zero waste and climate change policy that calls for an end to waste incineration. Zero waste produces many more jobs than its polluting, unhealthy, and expensive alternatives, especially incineration. Zero waste, when implemented correctly, allows for the most extensive resource recovery with the least environmental damage. It reduces climate-damaging carbon emissions and creates nutrient-rich compost for farms. It also promotes the development of light industrial infrastructure that's needed to recover recycled materials appropriately. Zero waste is a long-term investment in regional and local development, jobs, and environmental sustainability, and it has a growing and proven track record. Its impact on government budgets is competitive and often less expensive than incineration. The Teamsters Union knows this out of direct experience. For example, in San Francisco, which phased in a zero waste system in 2008, what we've seen is that San Francisco built its system in a way that was intentionally attentive to the need of residents, businesses, and local community, as well as the environment. This resulted in hundreds of good-paying Teamster Union jobs with good wages and benefits, hiring from the local surrounding communities, and of course, cleaner air and a cleaner environment, and it benefited the agricultural sector in the surrounding area that gets the compost. We urge the Baltimore City Council to adopt the Baltimore Clean Air Act. And here in Baltimore, we have thousands of members, and they're exposed to all the toxins, their kids and their neighbors. And we know that when you burn the waste, it goes in the air. It doesn't mostly go into energy, and it comes back down in our lungs. We all deserve and urgently need clean air, and there need not be a conflict between jobs and clean air. And I want to say something that's important to us as Teamsters, as labor movement members, that as Baltimore moves to change its waste system towards cleaner air and zero waste, we urge the city to ensure that any worker displaced from the eventual closure of incinerators, that these workers receive access to new jobs at equal or improved pay and benefits. Additionally, we suggest that Baltimore and the state of Maryland establish policy tools and incentives to promote the use of recycled materials widely in order to promote a regional remanufacturing industry. That's very important in our experience, which is the best way to close the loop of recyclables effectively. We can go to 80% recovery rate. Major cities have done it in this country. Major cities, leading cities in the world. It is possible for Baltimore. That's what I want to say on behalf of the Teamsters. And I want to close by saying that we represent tens of thousands of workers in the waste and recycling across America. Thank you.
Good evening, council folks. My name is James Alston. I live in Westport, which is within footsteps of one of Baltimore City's largest incinerators, which is Wheelabrator. I'm a resident of Westport. My family's been there for decades. I heard talks about the financial analysis related to the implementation of this particular bill. I hope that it is worth the sacrifice to invest in the quality of life for citizens of Baltimore. I believe I speak for so many folks in South Baltimore today. I want to make sure we have clarity on what we're being asked to do. The mission of the Clean Air Act is to invoke and create regulation standards for commercial solid waste incinerators. That would be achieved through continuous emission monitors with the intent, I quote, ensuring that accurate and complete information is available to the city and the general public about pollutants released from waste incinerators. What's wrong with that? Do entities who participate in the incineration business have something to hide, some egregious behavior or some disregard for humanity? We don't know. Why do I support this bill? Because I live within footsteps of an incinerator that has been spewing pollutants upon my community for more than 30 years. Because I have a sister who was born with cancer. Because I had a father and a grandfather who both lived in Westport and died of cancer. Because I myself had had so many respiratory illnesses since moving back to Westport. Because I care about the health outcomes of my community and my city. Because I have a moral obligation to humanity. Because I have 3 nephews who all grew up with asthma. Although the link between emissions and health outcomes tied to waste incinerators is a long-standing debate, there is no way each of us can sit here in this room today and look out one of these windows here in City Hall to view a smokestack spewing God knows what into the air and not think that is not something that affects our quality of life. Now I'm doing my part here today by speaking up and in helping you, City Council, the shepherds that have the tendency to lead our city into a better future, to make an informed decision that has the potential to positively affect the quality of life of our citizens. While I do realize addressing waste disposal needs are inescapable, we must find better ways of managing that task. My testimony, along with the testimony of so many others here in support of this bill, should encourage you to do the right thing and help Baltimore rise to see better days ahead. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Yinka Bode George. I'm here on behalf of the Maryland Public Health Association, but also as a proud Baltimore City resident. I'll also be brief because a lot of folks have covered health challenges already. So the Maryland Public Health Association, or MDPHA, is a nonprofit statewide organization of public health professionals dedicated to improving the life of all Marylanders. As the state's affiliate to the American Public Health Association, MDPHA represents many disciplines working to grow healthy communities throughout Maryland. We champion public health through advocacy efforts in Annapolis and jurisdictions throughout the state, as well as federally, by promoting best practices and providing valuable educational programs for members, creating strong organizational networks, and recognizing individuals and organizations for their outstanding service. MDPHA supports the clean air regulation because it seeks outcomes that advance health equity for Maryland communities. I'll just say that this legislation is critical because it urges Baltimore City to utilize a public health lens in regulating some of the largest contributors to air pollution in the city. This legislation calls for the use of modernized monitoring technology to continuously monitor toxic emissions and disclose the results on a public-facing website in real time, which will increase transparency and awareness of facility emissions. The legislation also calls for emissions regulations that align with other strict US standards for sulfur dioxides, mercury, dioxins, and nitrogen oxides to prioritize public health in the city. All Marylanders have a right to breathe clean air. Strict regulations and pollution control of industries can reduce emissions and improve asthma hospitalization rates in Baltimore City. No one should suffer health and environmental challenges because of where they live. The Maryland Public Health Association strongly urges the passing of this legislation to protect the health of all Baltimore communities, and particularly those who experience the burden of health adversity because of subpar air quality. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, before I begin, let the record show that the recycling rate for 2017 for Baltimore City.
Introduce yourself.
Sorry. Whoops. All right. Let the record show first that I'm Dante Swinton with the Energy Justice Network. And as I was saying, to answer some questions, the recycling rate in 2017 was 14.7% at the residential level. We got a 5% credit from the state because they consider Wheelabrator renewable energy. Further, the largest hospital in the city, Johns Hopkins, sued to get out of their contract with Curtis Bay Energy because it was cheaper for them to use alternatives rather than spending hundreds of dollars per ton to burn their waste at the facility. St. Joseph and Towson, for example, also decided to stop incinerating their waste, and their red bag waste went from 30 cents per pound to 7 cents per pound by using safe alternatives. So let's put that out there. Now to begin. All right. According to the website Wallet Hub, of the 100 largest cities in the United States, Baltimore ranks as the 61st greenest city. Of the 180 largest metro areas in the U.S., Baltimore ranks 145th for job opportunities. So how do we alleviate this? We must invest in a zero-waste economy. And the way we can begin this shift is by moving on from the Wheelabrator trash incinerator. Wheelabrator, contrary to your belief, you are not clean energy. How can you be clean energy when you're the largest air polluter in the city, accounting for 36% of all industrial emissions? How can you be clean energy when you released over 10,000 pounds of lead into the air since your inception? You can't be clean energy when your pollution is 3 times worse than the second largest polluter in Baltimore, which is a chemical plant. How are you clean energy when you release over 750,000 tons of CO2 every year, which is half the carbon pollution from industry in this city? You can't be clean energy when your annual NOx emissions are the equivalent of half the common cars or half the common trucks on Baltimore's roads. And you can't be clean energy when your SO2 emissions are 8 times the annual emissions of those cars and trucks combined. Of the 74 trash incinerators still operating in the U.S., Wheelabrator puts the 9th largest amount of toxic emissions in the air. Wheelabrator is only cleaner than 8 other incinerators, and that sounds like a failing grade to me. According to the EPA, 75% of what we dispose of is recyclable or compostable. If the city had recycled 75% of what we threw out in 2017, we could have saved over $3 million in tipping fees. $3 million. That could fund a cooperative grocery store in Cherry Hill to provide access to real food. Or it could fund a rec center in East Baltimore so children have an inside place to enjoy, fix row homes in West Baltimore, or enhance our efforts to end homelessness. But instead, we use that money to burn trash. What sense does that make? Moreover, the reuse value of those materials is in the tens of millions, if not more. Imagine the change some $50 million of direct reinvestment into communities would do for Charm City. We would have the best charms, the greatest charms. Everyone would say so. Council members, you might ask, where will we get the money to build these replacement facilities? Well, we can reallocate money from the bloated police budget for starters. But we also can reallocate funds from the Wheelabrator budget, which will see nearly $34 million set aside for burning over the next 3 years, at burning 200,000 tons a year if we did that. That $34 million is almost, I'm going to keep going. That $34 million is almost the exact cost of,
let's stick by the rules.
I promise, this is important, Councilman. Which we'll see, oh, sorry, you messed me up there. $34 million is almost the exact cost of San Francisco's recycling facility, which has the capacity to handle over 450,000 tons of material annually, more than what DPW handles each year. We also can submit a proposal to the closed loop partners who provide zero interest loans to municipalities.
Let's wrap it up. Who's next? We stick by the rules for everybody.
Councilman, I'm sorry, but these pieces are part of
what. This is the end.
They answer the questions, though.
Who's next? Mr. Ewell. That's the end of the panel. Is that it? That's the panel.
Can someone yield their time?
Thank you very much. Now we will go to from the audience, and the time is for each person is 2 minutes, and you will be, the timing is up there.
Questions?
Yes, you got a question too?
Yeah. Can I ask a question?
Go ahead. Who's the question to?
Well, I guess anybody on the panel that wants to answer. So I'm not on the committee, but I'm here because there's a lot of information on both sides that are floating around. Obviously very conflicting information, and so I'm trying to just get to the bottom of all that information. And so, you know, I read some of the state report that others read, where talk about $118 million impact over a few years, but then I hear that we'd save $3 million a year. So I'm just kind of curious what figures you guys have to show what, you know, obviously we all want clean air. So if there's plans or ideas, I mean, how do we go from what we're seeing some of the figures being, hopefully the council's fiscal analyst will do a report on this. But until then, do you guys have information that you can provide for us to show how we would be saving $3 million instead of this whole thing costing us $118 million?
Yes, I would have been happy to have answered that earlier. But in terms of the savings, the city, prior to the national sword policy of China, was paying $20 a ton to process recyclables. There was over $50 a ton to process, or to incinerate, I should say, at Wheelabrator. So you look back at what we sent to Wheelabrator using using DPW numbers, and we calculated out what we would have saved recycling at the 75% in 2017. That's how I got those numbers. Additionally, what I was trying to say before, Councilman, is that we've established how people can recycle at a greater degree. There was all this discussion about why we couldn't recycle or what's happening with that. We've run incentivized recycling programs down in South Baltimore. In that first program alone, residents recycled 78% more per household per week than the city average. And those who came and learned about this, the stuff about incineration, they recycled 149% more than the city average. So that proves that access to bin, free educations, and a bit of an incentive can work. And what we would want to do is utilize the money not being utilized, that being sent to Wheelabrator to reinvest in those communities who are actually doing the right thing. So there are great savings in this. We've gone to San Francisco's recycling facility and asked them their capital costs, which is why that $35 million makes more sense to spend on a facility that would replace Wheelabrator than to keep burning trash with it. And Wheelabrator's admitted at MDE that it would cost them $70 million alone just to install updated controls to lower their NOx emissions, and $11 million to operate that annually. Moving in this direction is far cheaper, and we need to make sure that people realize that and that the city realizes that, and we need to move as fast as possible.
So as far as the costs are concerned, so you're saying that besides it being better for the environment, you're saying it's also a major cost savings?
Absolutely. So Charlotte actually just released their zero waste plan.
Well, let's talk about Baltimore.
Yeah, well, no, there's a reason for that. So in that, they register that they're throwing out $111 million worth of material every year. So think about the fact that we're burning all the materials that are similar to cities that are large urban areas. So my point is that we're missing out on the value of the recyclable materials, considering we continue to burn most of them. Glass is more valuable when it's separated out. HDPE plastics are more valuable. We are missing out on that opportunity, and that is a way that we can capitalize on those savings.
All right, so I mean, we definitely want more recycling, but again, to my point, talking about Baltimore City specifically, so even beyond the efforts, and I applaud any efforts that anybody in this room does towards increasing recycling. I know every recycling day all of my neighbors are recycling, but yet we're still hearing that recycling numbers in Baltimore City are terrible. And so in talking about Baltimore City, I'm just, I guess, a little confused as to why, and this isn't just addressed at you, this is, I guess, to the council as well, why, if this is the case, that the city could be saving all this money and it is a lot more efficient and it's better for the environment, I'm not sure why this is being taken up through legislation as opposed to through the administration, simply, you know, seeking other alternatives, seeking other technologies and doing what they would do as opposed to, you know, what we're going down this route. So I'm just a little confused on that piece.
Yeah. I mean, we stated this earlier, that regards to your question is that this should have been addressed by DPW in the past 2, 3, 4 years ago. And so they know, they understand the numbers with Bresco, but they haven't, regards to recycle, and nothing's really being done right now about that.
So I know, but I mean,
hopefully Councilwoman Clark brought this up, that with this bill, what we're going to do is we're going to basically, we're being proactive and we're pushing DPW to come up with a plan for recycling.
Right, and you can see why this would be confusing to the citizens, that you know, we're saying we're hearing a lot of different things on both sides, and again, we haven't gotten to all the facts just yet, but that the city is the biggest customer, and yet the city is then also saying that we need to be doing things differently, yet we are the largest customer of this type of burning and getting rid of trash. And so I guess it's just overall consuming. It's confusing to see all that,
Councilman,
and get different, and to hear different,
right.
and to hear different figures being thrown out there as far as pollutants and different things. But then we're not actually being told, how this stuff is being measured properly and what the cost benefit of that would be. And if these incinerators were to go away, would that end pollution in Baltimore City? No, of course not. And the fact that Baltimore City is double the pollution, like we've heard in the beginning of the hearing, I was listening even before I got here, that also contributes to the fact that we're in a city, and there's a lot more pollutants in a city than there is out in the counties and out in farmland. And so just trying to get to what those specifics are and what this contributor is and what that cost benefit is, alternatives, and if there is such a cost benefit, and how we could measure that, as opposed to just trying to push one thing that we hope will be the solution. Because I can tell you,
I actually have answers to that.
I'm not asking the question, but if the figures from the state legislation are correct, and we're talking about $118 million, I think that's obviously a long conversation that the citizens of Baltimore want to have about how $118 million would be spent in Baltimore City, and whether that's something that should go towards education or something else, as opposed to any other alternative. And that's why it's important for us to get that information.
Before I call on Mayor Councilwoman Clark, the one thing that I want to say, and either Dante or someone could respond to this from the panel, is that we're not just, this group isn't just coming out talking about recycling for the city to do something. They have community residents, they got groups that's ready to work and sit down with DPW to put together programs and help the city in regards to a recycling program. So they're proactive, wanting to work with the city. So you just want to end with that, because I know Councilwoman Clark's
it'll be quick. So Councilman Schleifer, you make excellent comments there. I will counter that to say that the facilities that we talked about, the one in San Francisco in particular, is $35 million, but that would be able to cover all the material that Baltimore City proper handles. They handle, and Willebrator handles more than Baltimore City. We get rid of the trash that Baltimore City is not responsible for. Additionally, those other facilities on average actually only cost $8 to $15 million. We budget anywhere from $8 to $11 million to burn trash. We could build a facility to start replacing stuff for the same amount of money. Additionally, I brought up Charlotte because Charlotte is another city of color. Oakland is another city of color. Memphis is another city of color. So Memphis actually just gave everyone a 96-gallon recycling bin to match their trash cans. And unlike Baltimore City, which is why you're asking why don't we have these recycling rates up higher, there hasn't been in-depth education and outreach. And when they did that, their recycling rate more than doubled. So we need to do this type of stuff that we've been suggesting to get us to an aggressively higher recycling rate, save the money, make the money off of the materials of recycling and not burning, and not leading to $156 million in lost productivity thanks to asthma in this city by going away from Willebrator. And I'm happy to answer any other of your cost questions beyond this.
Okay, let's move on. I know Councilwoman Clark, you have a question?
Yeah, no, I just have a statement to make. I'm just repeating myself here, but it won't be the first person that did. We have here a bill about clean air. It is only if we, I hope, approve that legislation that we put ourselves into the position where we have a conversation that makes sense and reality about how our solid waste program fits into that environment. That's a different, it's related, but it's not a deciding factor here. The question before us here is, do we want to legislate to clean the air in Baltimore City and do what we need to do, not to make it immaculately clear, but to at least achieve what others in other places have managed to achieve with regulations? Do we want to? And that's the question before us. Who it costs are the private sector people here. They have the costs right now if that's approved, because they pay the monitors who come in and set up the oversight to make sure these guidelines are met. Yes, we have a stake here. Yes, we could do a better job of recycling. Yes, who knows how many millions and millions of dollars will be mentioned and thrown around before we ever actually settle down to say how Baltimore City's solid waste responds if this legislation, I hope, is approved. And then we need to follow up there, but it's not cause and effect. And I think we have to focus on the clean air aspect here, because that's what this is about, and it's part of a big, and others have gotten there and achieved it. It's not space age technology, but it is expensive, more expensive than these private sector institutions are now spending, and that's the conversation here, because we want them to do it, and to be transparent about it, and to keep everybody involved and informed. That's what we're here for.
Okay.
Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman.
Can I say one last thing?
Really
Really
one
quick.
more, then we got to go on public testimony.
I mean, with all due respect, Councilwoman, I mean, it's not, this isn't an expense that is going to be burdened to these companies that we're referring to, as since Baltimore City is the largest customer of these companies, if their costs go up, our costs go up. And so this burden, whatever it may be, which we don't have those figures yet, and so we'll decide at that point if the cost benefit is there. But this burden is going to be a burden on the city and the general fund and the taxpayers. It's not a burden that any private company is going to swallow.
If I can quickly respond to that.
If I may respond, that's part of the discussion. That's what we're talking about. So.
Hey, we provided numbers.
Actually.
I mean, that's what we're here for. Let's talk about the air and see what we end up doing.
Let's
The quick answer to that, is that the contract that the city has with the Northeast Maryland Waste Disposal Authority for use of this incinerator explicitly says that the cost cannot go up under the current term of the contract unless the city approves it. And so that's through the end of 2021.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. So if there's no other questions, I want to go into the public audience. Again, I'm saying you have 2 minutes. We're going to start with, is that Jim Connolly? Yes. Okay, so Jim, I just want to ask you this. I see your name down here that you're for the bill. I just, you're not a lobbyist or nothing.
No, I'm the Vice President of Environment, Health, and Safety for Wheelabrator Technologies. I'm for the bill with amendments that we have proposed.
You're for the bill?
With amendments that we have proposed.
We're not offering any amendments, so if you want to testify, you have 2 minutes.
Okay. Well then, without amendments, we're opposed to the bill.
Okay.
Right. Approval of the bill as written will have negative environmental impacts, fiscal impacts, and other impacts, including 37,000 more tractor-trailer trips on the city of Baltimore streets every year. Generally speaking, many of the provisions of the bill we're open to in terms of the monitoring, in terms of having someone, we do that at other facilities. But passing unamended will certainly have the effect of closing Wheelabrator, and will be a choice by the council of long-haul and landfill disposal, 37,000 trucks a year taking the waste out of the city to a landfill far away. Over the past 2 years, Wheelabrator has been the target of a baseless and misleading media campaign premised on the false narrative that the facility is responsible for poor air quality in Baltimore. The fact that we have air quality permits issued by the MDE issued after intensive and rigorous review of environmental standards designed to protect public health and the environment, clearly refutes that premise. There are other sources which contribute more significantly to air quality issues in Baltimore. Even the Environmental Integrity Project acknowledged in 2017 that on-road vehicles are the largest contributor to air pollution that people breathe in Baltimore. Voting in favor of this bill unamended adds 37,000 trucks to that. The real fact is that any facility impacts from Wheelabrator, Baltimore are significantly below all federal and state air quality standards. Those are standards set to protect public health and the environment with an adequate margin of safety. Using detailed science to develop national ambient air quality standards and detailed studies to show that Wheelabrator plus background does not exceed those standards. Greenhouse gas impacts are something of concern to a lot of people these days. Every ton of solid waste that we process.
And we got about 50 people want to testify. So your testimony is duly noted, but I think Councilwoman.
I just want to ask you one thing quickly. I don't know if you were here when there was testimony from a resident and family member of 30 years in that Westport community, and he talked about his asthma. He talked about his family. He talked about his sister having cancer. He just gave a history of a family and the surrounding community that has been suffering for over 30 years. How do you respond to that?
Well, unfortunately, respiratory illnesses are common in many cities and are not specific to neighborhoods near our facility. The fact that we have permits which have been developed. Again, the agencies, the EPA, the Maryland Department of Environment, does detailed studies and determines what levels of certain constituents in the air, pollutants, would cause harm to the most sensitive members of society. They put levels of safety on top of that. When we are forced to demonstrate that what comes out of our facility does not cause impacts greater than that, added on to the background that's measured in the city. If we could not meet that standards, we would not have permits today.
We still have families of proof that are suffering and have suffered, and cancer, lead poisoning, asthma. The history is still there, and it's still happening, and it's happening to minority families, and the proof is right there. So thank you for your comment.
Councilman Costello, and then Councilman Pinkett.
Can you walk me through the economics of Wheelabrator making the upgrades to be compliant with the proposed legislation as is, please?
Well, currently we're in the process of upgrading our performance to take a 25% reduction in NOx emissions. And we're in the process of doing that right now. We've agreed to that. And with that, we're doing a study to see and we're going to submit this to the MDE, how much further we can go with NOx, nitrogen oxides. The limit proposed in this legislation is a limit that is in place and at one place in the United States, which is a facility that was specifically designed from where the waste enters the furnace, the whole furnace design, the entire design of the system, and the emission control equipment to meet that number. The only way to meet that number, it's a technology issue, it's not an economic issue, we'd need to replicate that technology, essentially build a new facility.
Mm-hmm. So, I don't mean to be redundant, but to the original question, the economic cost. What is the economic cost to comply with the legislation?
I don't know what the figure would be to build a new facility here in Baltimore. I know the disruption to service would probably be on the order of 4 or 5 years.
So what about retrofit? I mean,
what about?
The question is, how much would it cost for you to retrofit to try to reach those standards?
Yeah, and again, the standard that is proposed in this legislation is in place in one facility that is completely designed and built to meet that standard. It's not a standard that can be met with retrofit. Currently, we're We're reducing our NOx emissions by 25%, and we're engaged in a study to see how much further we can go at this facility with a retrofit. So when that study is complete, we'll have a sense of how much lower can we go, what the cost would be, and whether to move forward with that.
So just to confirm, take the economics out of it. You could not comply with this legislation unless you built an entirely new facility.
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay. Councilman Pinkett?
Councilman Costello asked the same question.
Okay. At this time, Austin Pritchard.
Good evening, council members. My name is Austin Pritchard. I've been with Wheelabrator Baltimore for 14 years. I started out as a concrete worker, but I currently work as the plant manager. At Wheelabrator Baltimore, we employ 65 people in our facility. We have an additional 20 people that work full-time as contractors, and we have hundreds of other contractors that work at our site every year. We're proud that the jobs at Wheelabrator Baltimore are high-paying, with a low barrier to entry, and there's lots of opportunity for growth. These jobs have a positive impact on our employees' lives, the lives of their families, and as you can see, all of these guys have come here because they're proud of their jobs. Thanks, guys. Wheelabrator Baltimore pays back $9 million to the city's budget that goes to help fund police, fire, and schools. If we go away, that's $9 million that goes away from the budget. We contribute more than $50 million in jobs and economic activity for our city and for Maryland every year. Every day, we process around 2,200 tons of waste that would otherwise go to landfills. We turn your post-recycled waste into energy to power downtown Baltimore, including M&T Stadium, Maryland University, and more than 220 other businesses. We also recycle 1,500 tons of metals every year that would otherwise end up in a landfill. This bill would shut us down, which will send all of our trash to the local landfills that are already close to being full. We know there is no single solution to our city's waste problem, no silver bullet to protect the environment, but we know for sure that this bill is worse for the city and for the environment. This bill will wipe out the livelihood of our 65 employees, all our indirect economic impact, and damage the vendors and workers that count on our facility's business. It will cost our already cash-strapped city even more, and we'll be left with piles of waste with nowhere to put it but on tractor trailers for someone else to deal with, some other city. Please consider.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, Austin, can you give us your testimony? Do you have it? You could get it to us?
Would you like me to get it to you a little less scratched up?
Yeah, we'll take it. Brad Keller.
Yeah, he should get a copy.
Thank you.
No, he should get one, so.
Just to help Austin out for a second, he mentioned 1,500 tons. It's actually 15,000 tons of metal that we do recycle at our facility. Thank you, Chairman Reisinger and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Brad Keller. I am the Environmental Health and Safety Manager for Wheelabrator Baltimore. I've worked at the facility for over 8 years. In my role, I directly manage the facility's strict compliance with all state, local, and federal regulations for air quality, water quality, and health and safety. Before coming to Wheelabrator, I held a leadership role with a waste management company. In this role, I managed a staff that was responsible for environmental compliance for all Pennsylvania and West Virginia landfills, transfer stations, recycling facilities, and hauling companies. I've seen solid waste operations of all types through the Mid-Atlantic region and the New England area. I can say without question that waste-to-energy is by far the most efficient, clean, safe, and convenient way to deal with post-recycled waste. Because of this, I am here to testify in opposition of the proposed bill in its current form. This bill is designed to close the Wheelabrator facility and take away my job and the job of 65 other people. It is not a Clean Air Act. A true Clean Air Act would contain fair and equitable emissions enforcement for all sources of air pollution. This bill singles out my facility, which is already strictly regulated by the MDE. Recently, I worked in partnership with MDE in efforts to reduce our NOx emissions by 25%. Upon completion of this project, Wheelabrator will have the lowest NOx emissions for existing plants in the Mid-Atlantic and New England region. I take pride in our facility. We work tirelessly 24/7, 365 to create an environmentally friendly and safe partner for Baltimore City to manage trash. I also proudly tour hundreds of people through our facility each year, including school groups, college groups, community stakeholders, industry professionals, government and military personnel from the U.S. and abroad. I also know that there are council members that have toured this facility. I invite those of you who have not toured this facility to come out and meet with me and meet with our team to have a better understanding of what we do.
All right. Brad, do you have written testimony you want to hand? Dan Bundy.
Hi, council members. My name is Daniel Bandy. I'm the maintenance manager at Wheelabrator Baltimore. Unlike my constituents, I did not write a testimony. I'm just here to tell you about how this affects me and my family. Without this plant, I have no means to provide for my family. I have had a life of service since I was 17. I enlisted in the U.S. Army Infantry. I did 2 combat tours to Kuwait. When I came out of the Army, I was collecting unemployment. I had no real means, no real job. Bresco gave me an opportunity to which I like to believe that I capitalized. I've been with the plant for 13 years. I've been with Wheelabrator for 13 years. I've worked my way all the way from an assistant operator to the maintenance manager of the facility. This plant means a lot to me. This plant is my livelihood. This plant is what lets me know that my children are going to be okay as they grow up. So you hear a little emotion in my voice when I hear a bill about you want to take my livelihood away. You want to affect my house, my income, my children. It hits deep in my soul and my heart. And this isn't the way that I believe public service should really reach out to people. We're being attacked. We're not here to hurt anybody. My son has asthma. I wouldn't do anything to endanger my son. I wouldn't do anything to endanger your children. That's not what I am. That's not my values. That's not what I do. So, you know, when you consider this bill, just consider me and my family and know that I wouldn't do anything to hurt anybody here. So, thank you.
Thank you. Rob Venuto. I apologize if I messed that up. Rob Venuto? No? Here he comes.
My name is Rob Venuto. I've been at the plant for 34 years. I started there when I was 18 years old. I have 5 healthy children, and I have 6 healthy grandchildren. I didn't write up a testimony. I was just trying to do it from memory. I'm opposed to the bill. That's all.
Okay, thank you. Adam Strobel.
Thank you, Councilman. My name's Adam Strobel. I'm an employee for Wheelabrator. I was just recently promoted to shift supervisor. I'm definitely living proof that this company provides an opportunity for at least 65 people, and it also cascades down to an endless number of contractors and local vendors, as Austin said. But it certainly seems to me that legislation like this is just another slippery slope that takes us to a point to where Baltimore, a place that I was born and raised, I'm a native, has gone down this slope to where we overregulate and overtax honest businesses, and we drive them out to the point where people won't be able to afford to live in Maryland, let alone breathe the air, whether it's clean or otherwise. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ronnie Fesax. Sorry about that.
Hello, my name is Rodney Isaacs. I've been an employee at Wheelabrator Baltimore for 14 years as a maintenance mechanic. In my 14 years, we've continuously worked to upgrade this facility and to run this facility the best way we possibly can. And this would immediately impact all of us and our families And we would like you to just think about what we're saying and consider that before you go in this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wayne. Kevin Hagner.
Hi, my name is Kevin Hagner. I've worked at this facility for 9 years. We have a lot of good people that work hard every day. I've seen emission standards get tougher and tougher. I've been in the electric generation industry since 1982, and I think we've really followed along with the more strict emission standards, and I think we're doing everything we can. As far as illnesses and stuff like that around Westport, you can't forget that you used to have glass factories. You had a PG&E plant that put out a lot more emissions than we ever do or did. So that's just something to think about. Thank you.
Thank you. Gordon Kaufman.
Hello, I'm Gordon Kaufman. I'm the CEO and majority owner of Baltimore Hydraulics Incorporated. With me is my son, Christopher. He's the president and future majority owner of Baltimore Hydraulics Incorporated. We're here representing the 30 people that work in our company, and naturally the 30 families that go with them. I've been called the old guy, and I've been around long enough to have seen our success and longevity come from many areas. If you don't have hydraulic equipment, you may not even know us, but we've been working in Baltimore City 57 years. We climbed the ladder of success working for Key Highway Shipyard, Maryland Dry Dock, Sparrows Point Shipyard, Bethlehem Steel, Eastern Stainless Steel, and many others that have closed or moved. And when I hear of another champion, I guess, of the city being threatened to close, it bothers me. So I would ask that you do your homework and that you see what the real impact is, not just for the 65 families at Wheelabrator, but our 30 families and others like us. Thank you.
Thank you. Is this Tim Henderson?
Thank you, Chairman Reisinger and members of the committee and the council members. I'm an environmental attorney. I've been representing the Bresco facility since 1991, and I've been an environmental lawyer since 1980, so been dealing with this a long time. My basic reason, and I'm with a small law firm in Annapolis, Rich and Henderson. My basic purpose in speaking is to point out, I'm not sure who the lawyer was that says he sees no legal problems with this bill, but my point is that for 3 reasons the bill will fail. If it goes to court, it'll be overturned. And the first reason is because the Maryland Environmental Code makes it very clear that if there's going to be a more stringent law governing facilities like Bresco, you have to go to the Maryland Department of Environment, need some water, and ask them to adopt, to change their regulations. Secondly, there's a common law concept of preemption, and where you have a law that state law and a federal law that have totally occupied the field of regulating facilities like Bresco that were built in accordance with the environmental laws, the Clean Air Act, and the state Clean Air Act. The common law in Maryland will dictate that local government has no right and or authority to adopt a legislation like this. And then third, the city charter basically says where you have a situation where you have a state law that directs, like I said, that cities can't do what this law is doing. It says that, the charter says that where there's a conflict with state law, the city council does not have the authority to adopt a law like this. So that's my basic.
Do we have your testimony?
You do have my testimony.
Tim?
And we did submit a point-by-point rebuttal
Tim,
to the city solicitor.
2 minutes. I want to give courtesy to respect to those who've got to testify after you. So can you supply us with written testimony or send it to us? Written testimony?
I believe it was given to them.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think this is Ted Michaels. Is that correct? Do we have it? Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Good evening. My name is Ted Michaels, and I serve as president of the Energy Recovery Council, which represents companies and local governments engaged in the waste energy sector. ERC is extremely concerned that the impact of Council Bill 180306 would jeopardize the long-term viability of waste energy in Baltimore. As a result, the city would potentially be denied the benefits of clean, renewable energy production that has long been a proven and effective means of managing post-recycled waste for the city of Baltimore. The proposed ordinance should be modified in a manner consistent with the testimony of Wheelabrator Technologies. We fully support recycling, but as DPW noted earlier in their statement, there will always be waste. Waste energy facilities recover valuable energy from trash after efforts to reduce, reuse, and recycle have been implemented by households and local governments. It is important to remember that after recycling has been implemented, there are only 2 options left for the waste: waste energy and landfilling. US EPA's solid waste hierarchy clearly prefers waste energy over landfilling. In fact, the US EPA said that waste energy facilities produce electricity with less environmental impact than almost any other source of electricity, and that, quote, communities greatly benefit from dependable, sustainable capacity of municipal waste energy plants, unquote. The US EPA, in fact, states on its website that converting non-recyclable waste materials into electricity and heat generates a renewable energy source and reduces carbon emissions. In addition, waste energy facilities provide stable, long-term, well-paying jobs while simultaneously injecting dollars into local economies through the purchase of local goods and services and the payment of fees and taxes. In conclusion, ERC urges the City of Baltimore to work with all parties to ensure the city may continue to rely on waste energy to avoid landfilling and displace fossil fuel consumption. Thank you.
Jack Perko.
Thank you so much. Jack Perko. I'm the president and CEO of Curtis Bay Medical Waste Services. Just to set a couple things straight real quick, Johns Hopkins is still a customer. I was on the phone with them this morning. In addition to that, there's not just one autoclave plant near our incinerator in Curtis Bay. There are 3. All 3 of them are actually customers of mine. The largest is Stericycle, and 30% of all the waste I receive actually comes from them. We're a small but rapidly growing medical waste services company here in Baltimore. We currently have 234 people, of which 100 live in Maryland, 50 live in Baltimore City. 46 members of our team are United Steel Workers, and you'll hear from some of them here in just a few minutes. Provide good jobs to good people, providing critical need to the entire healthcare system, not just hospitals, but academic institutions, biomedical research, pharmaceutical manufacturing, and law enforcement. We own not only the incinerator, but 4 autoclave plants throughout the region. Who do we serve? Our customers include the likes of Johns Hopkins, University of Maryland Medical System, National Institute of Health, Leidos, Fort Detrick, and the Naval Medical Research Center, just to name a few. I would also like to point out that 50% of all the volume that I receive at that plant comes from competitors that compete with me and other service providers that provide service to medical waste service providers or medical waste institutions in Baltimore. I can assure you that my customers have a need for medical waste incineration. Saying that you don't need an incinerator because you have autoclaves is like saying I don't need my horse because I have cows. two totally separate different things. Incineration focuses on pathological and trace chemotherapeutic waste. Our incinerator was originally conceived, designed, and built in cooperation with members of the Maryland Hospital Association 25 years ago. Since our purchase of this facility in 2012, we've invested upwards of $6.2 million to meet new standards that came into place in 2014.
Jack, you have public, could we have your
We sent
testimony?
it to you already.
I have it?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Kearney Spencer.
Good evening, committee.
Good evening.
My name is Kearney Spencer. I'm the local president down at Curtis Bay Energy, and I just wanted to put a face to you talking about the shutdown of the plant. I've been there over 20-something years, and because of that plant literally saved my life because I came home from prison. Nobody wanted to harm me, and Curtis Bay Energy gave me a shot. Since I've been there those 20 years, I've come up the ranks. I'm the floor supervisor. I'm the president of the union, as I said earlier. And, you know, that company, as far as the safety standpoint, I'm also on the safety committee. So I see what they put into in terms of making sure it's safe. And as I say, I've been there 20 years, and I mean, I breathe the air, the same air that they're talking about is so infectious or whatever it's doing to everybody, hasn't done anything to me. I just wanted to put a face to, you know.
Troy Cooper. Troy Cooper.
Yes, good evening. My name is Troy Cooper. I'm an employee at Curtis Bay Energy. I've been working there for over 15 years. And I just want to kind of piggyback off my coworker. I am also a convicted felon. And like you said, when no one else wanted to give us a chance, they gave me the opportunity and chance to turn my life around. You know, since I've been working down there, I haven't been back to prison. I've put a son through college, bought a home, and I'm living a good, clean, and productive life. And I know without this job, I would probably still be out in the street. And you're talking about shutting it down, and that job is my backbone. And matter of fact, I'm going to close on a house Friday because of this job. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Melvin Gibson Bay, is that correct? Or was it, yeah, Melvin Gibson Bay, right? Yeah. Is he coming? Yeah. After him is Kevin Cornish. Melvin, good evening.
Good evening.
Kevin Cornish is next, or Keith Cornish. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, sir. My name is Melvin Gibson Bay. I started working at Curtis Bay Energy for the past 4 years. And like the other two gentlemen, well, I'm not a, well, anyway. Like the other two gentlemen, Curtis Bay has changed my situation an awful lot. I'm in the twilight years of my life. I'm 63 years old. And where else can I go at this time and make this type of money that I make at Curtis Bay Energy? You know, so I appreciate Curtis Bay Energy, and I hope you consider, you know, exactly what we're going to go through if this facility closes down. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Kevin Cornish? Okay. John Kumm, K-U-M-M?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, council members. I'm John Kumm. I'm a professional environmental engineer with over 30 years experience. I've consulted to Curtis Bay Energy for 20 years. So I'm speaking in opposition to the bill as written. The first point I want to make is that over that 25 or so years that the company's been in operation, they've passed through 3 different generations of regulations, and each time they've done what they needed to do to comply with those new rules. And in many cases, the pollutant limits have been reduced by a factor of 2 orders of magnitude, or 100 times in that time period. Right now, the company complies with all of the limits in the proposed statute, with the exception of the NOx limit. And in order to meet that NOx limit, they would have to invest several $1 million. I would like to point out that when the state of Maryland reviewed the regulations related to ozone control, when there was a new ozone standard established in 2015, they go through a process called the NOx RACT evaluation, and these rules are designed to control existing sources of ozone precursors, NOx being one of them. They determined at that time that there was no reason to lower the standard that applied to Curtis Bay Energy. I'd also like to point out that my overarching opinion about the way the bill is structured is that it's not the best way to achieve the objectives. The objectives of clean air and protecting our children and having transparent environmental data are all very laudable. But engaging in a lot of expensive monitoring and generating a lot of data without contextual information about what that data means is not going to advance that objective. It's a very expensive undertaking to monitor that many pollutants continuously. Many of them don't have proven methods, EPA-approved methods for monitoring. So the last point I'll make is that I think I would recommend to the council that the best way to improve air quality and working with the incinerators in Baltimore is to have a cooperative process with the potentially regulated parties the way that MDE does. Thank you.
Kevin, could we have, Kevin, do you have, John, do you have written testimony you could give to the committee? Okay. Ken Jackson.
Good evening. My name is Ken Jackson. I'm the director at the Medical Waste Incinerator in Curtis Bay. First I'd like to say is that I've been in the environmental field the last 40 years, longer than I care to admit. From cleaning up the Monument Street landfill, it's always been important to me I like to breathe clean air, my family, my grandkids. But I've heard all of you people ask about hiring the people generally that have a hard time being hired. You've heard from a few of them tonight. We actually look for those people because we want to give them a leg up. And that's what we've done at our facility. Half of our facility at the plant are people that live in Baltimore City and may not be as desirable to be hired in other areas. We do that because it's important to the community. I've offered every person on the other side to come visit our plant. I believe that we've done a great job. We presently meet all the requirements in that standard with the exception of the NOx. We actually do meet all the Obama standards, and actually we're about 10% lower than that. It is important to breathe clean air. I believe it. I think everyone believes it. But I think that the bill is a little bit intellectually dishonest because you are asking for continuous monitoring of things that haven't been approved yet. And I don't think that that's a problem other than there's nothing out there that says we can do it. Dioxin furans can't be continuously monitored. They're done on batch. So it's important that you understand what our company does. We're very community oriented. We're involved with the community, and that's pretty much it. Our facility has worked over 1,000 hours without a lost time injury. All those things are important to me. All those things. Thank you.
Thank you. Trent Zivkovich.
Trent Zivkovich, Environmental Counsel with Whiteford Taylor Preston, here on behalf of Curtis Bay Medical Waste Services. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and members of the council and the committee. Curtis Bay Incinerator is the largest medical waste incinerator in the country. But please don't be scared by this rhetoric. For comparison purposes, I want you to recognize that it's about 1/30th the size of the emissions of Wheelabrator. It's also smaller in terms of emissions than Domino Sugar. It's smaller in emissions than University of Maryland Medical System, Johns Hopkins Hospital, Johns Hopkins Homewood campus. So let's recognize that when we're talking about the amount of emissions and pollutants that are put out, it is relative, okay? So I want to be sure about that. Like Jack had said before, it was originally conceived as by the hospitals in the Maryland area to be a regional, localized facility. In other words, a place where they could use the best technology to eliminate all the small individual incinerators that had been located at all the individual hospitals. They literally put their eggs into one basket because they knew that federal requirements were becoming so strict. As John said, we're in our 4th generation of federal standards right now. Those standards are so incredibly strict, promulgated during the Obama administration, that it cost $6.2 million for Curtis Bay to meet them the last time around. The bottom line is medical waste. There are certain types of medical waste that is required to be treated through incineration, contrary to what you've been told by others. Certain types of medical waste, pathological waste, human tissue, forgive me, but it's human tissue, chemotherapy waste, certain types of dialysis waste are required by law to be incinerated. Medical waste providers autoclave what they can because it is twice as expensive to incinerate as compared to autoclaving. Please recognize that Curtis Bay is a regional facility across the country. 31 states legally require this incineration. We take materials from out of state as well. This has always been the case. We take materials from autoclave providers because they can't handle it. So in short, when the committee is considering the bill, please consider and talk to everyone involved so we can present the accurate facts. Thank you.
Thank you. Kevin.
Any
Kreischer?
questions?
Kevin Kreischer.
Hello, thank you. My name is Kevin Kreischer. I'm an executive committee member with the Maryland chapter of the Sierra Club. And I heard someone say a few seconds ago that they thought the Wheelabrator was the cleanest industry at which they had ever worked, or something to that effect. Does that person know that we are expected to share truth in this room? I have to say, as one speaking for the Sierra Club, I am here today because I am most frustrated with the lack of transparency between the industries like incinerators and groups such as ourselves. We do want to work together, and maybe even some extent of incineration will exist someday. But to do so, we must have a certain amount of transparency, and so this bill definitely is appropriate at this time. One thing I'd like to point out is that because a lot of people are very interested when I say this, anything is recyclable. Anything. What the issue is how much does it cost to recycle? And so when something like Wheelabrator says that they are absolutely necessary to the stability of the city of Baltimore, they're actually skewing the information. You see, in order to generate a recycling infrastructure, you have to have the need for it to begin with. Basically, in the experience of the time I've spent with the Sierra Club, incinerators are the opposite of resource recovery, basically because they remove garbage from a would-be loop and put it on a dead end to toxic waste. And they give people an excuse not to recycle and to reuse. More than half of the intake in Wheelabrator could be recycled or composted, yet Wheelabrator justifies its infrastructure by saying that we need them, Baltimore needs them, because we don't have an infrastructure. They're correct, but we'll create one once they get out of the way and allow us to.
Okay. Colin Brinman. We can't, yeah, I'll call the names, yeah.
All right.
Have you signed in? Okay. We got a few to go yet. Go ahead.
Thank you to the City Council and especially to my council member for District 11, Mr. Costello. My name is Colin Brenneman, and I'm here to speak in favor of the Baltimore Clean Air Act. A good friend of mine is a doctor who takes care of the uninsured. One day he was seeing a patient and asked the patient how he was doing. The patient responded, "Not so well, doc. My sister couldn't afford $140 for her inhaler. She had an asthma attack, and she died before she got to the hospital. Now I'm raising her kids." There's little Baltimore City can do to tackle prescription drug price gouging, but what we can do is alleviate the causes of asthma so that fewer people require medication in the first place. Our kids face enough problems: gun violence and trauma, parents who struggle to find good paying jobs, underfunded schools which leave them ill-prepared for their futures. Not only are children especially vulnerable to developing asthma as a result of air pollution, but for many of our kids, asthma will follow them around for the rest of their lives, sometimes to lethal effect. And Bresco is the leading cause of asthma-causing air pollution in our city. But let's talk money. Sick people work less and so pay less taxes. And dead people, of course, pay no taxes at all. We cannot look at the possible additional expense of waste management were Bresco to burn less trash in the absence of a comprehensive understanding of the costs which the proliferation of diseases like asthma impose on our city. It is inarguable that trash incineration produces less jobs than other more labor-intensive forms of waste management. Moving towards a more environmentally sustainable model of waste management would therefore contribute to the revenue of our city by spurring economic development in our neighborhoods and alleviating one of the major side effects of joblessness, crime, which places an enormous burden on our city's budget. Many of the problems children face in our city will take years, if not decades, to solve. This is not one of them, and our children cannot wait. Every second they breathe, they take in polluted air which will affect them for the rest of their lives. I urge this committee to advance the Baltimore Clean Air Act. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. I'm going to call three in a row. Solomon Brooks, Patrick Moldy, and Shashander Campbell. So the first one is Solomon. And then it's Patrick Moldy. Go ahead, Solomon.
Hi, Solomon Brooks. I'm a student in Baltimore County, and I would like to thank you for hearing me speak today. And what I would like to say is, as we gather for the hearing, we must remember that as pollution occurs, it doesn't just harm the environment. It has consequences that aren't as abstract as we would all like to think. It affects people living in places that are polluted. Eutrophication affects not water quality, but also organisms living in the body of water. Noise pollution affects not just air, but nesting of birds. And in this case, air pollution released by the Wheelabrator and like polluters affects people who are alive and attempting to thrive like you and me, and it doesn't stop at adults. Children, school children, are directly affected by the pollution from the Wheelabrator and like polluters. According to the Baltimore City Health Department, Baltimore's pediatric asthma hospitalization rate is the highest in Maryland and one of the highest in the nation. Asthma accounts for the greatest loss of productivity, either through missed work days and school absenteeism from children. A 1998 study, this is widely known and known information that's been around for years, that NOx and SO2, which are nitrogen oxide and sulfur dioxide, have a positive correlation to emergency room hospitalization for children. And the Wheelabrator is the 5th highest source of nitrogen oxide in the state and the largest stationary source of NOx in the city. It emitted 1,141 tons of NOx in 2016, making it the state's 5th largest emitter of the pollutant. NOx emissions contribute to the formation of ozone and particulate matter in the air that people breathe. And as a student, and as someone who has younger sisters and cousins who are children and students, I feel a deep empathy to these children missing vital education for reasons out of their control. And even if correlation does not imply causation, the Wheelabrator has a very high correlation to harm, too high to be ruled out or avoided for the safety of our citizens. The Clean Air Act is for the people and inherently for the children. Thank you.
Thank you. Patrick Bodie, and then Shashonda Campbell.
Mr. Chair, council members, I'm here in support of the bill. My name is Patrick Moles. For 20 years, I've lived just over a mile from the Wheelabrator incinerator in Councilman Costello's district. I'm raising a teenage son who's here with me tonight. I'm a physician and have a master's degree from the Department of Preventive Medicine in Maryland. I want to talk to you a little bit about mercury. Mercury is
further to the microphone, yes.
Mercury is highly toxic, causing permanent central nervous system damage. In 2001, mercury was banned in Maryland schools. A ban on the retail sale of mercury thermometers occurred the following year. The EPA advises that if you spill a 1/16 of a teaspoon of mercury, you should close all the inside doors, turn down the temperature, evacuate the premises, call the health and fire department. So just think of the lengths we go to eliminate exposure to even minute amounts of mercury. The most recent year for which we have data, 2014, Wheelabrator released into the air 52 pounds of mercury. Let's talk about lead. You know lead's highly toxic and causes learning disabilities and brain damage. Its toxicity is the reason Baltimore City mandates the testing of all children for lead poisoning at 12 and 24 months. That's why all but 19 Baltimore City schools pay for bottled water. For older homes, we require registration with MDE and inspection upon for lead inspection for changes upon tenancy. So respectfully, council members, you concern yourselves with, rightfully so, with micrograms of lead in our water and rental properties, micrograms. Wheelabrator released in 2014 280 pounds of lead into the atmosphere. So if we're depending on the EPA to save us and clean our air up, that's not going to happen. That responsibility, we're looking to you for help. I support the Clean Air Act.
Mr. Chair, I didn't hear one thing that Patrick said. The number of pounds of mercury, I'm sorry.
52.
And that's annual?
Pounds. For the last year, we have data 2014.
Annual, okay, got it. Yep, thank you, Patrick.
Thank you. Shashonda Campbell, Destiny Walford, and Greg Shaltel.
Hi, my name is Shashonda Campbell. I am here on behalf of United Workers. And today I came to say that there shouldn't be a decision between jobs and clean air. So this is not a war on jobs for people that work in these factories. This is not a war on them. This is a war for our community, because the people that lives there, we are the ones that have to deal with this. We are the ones that are affected by this. So that's why today we need to pass this bill, because this is an important bill, because we have to stay here. Our kids will be here. Asthma in my family has run so high, it's not right. My little brother that is 6 months just went back to the hospital and got diagnosed with asthma at 6 months. This is ridiculous. This air needs to be clean. It's not fair that we have to live here under these circumstances, because no one should have these problems. There's enough problems going on in these communities every day. Someone needs to be out here teaching them about composting and recycling, which on behalf of United Workers, we are. We have just went to a school today where students didn't even know what recycling was. Students didn't know what composting was. It's not fair to these communities that are surrounding these problems that we have to deal with this, because we are directly affected by this. So when we speak, we should be heard. Action needs to be taken. We elect people here to represent us, so represent us. Do your jobs that you are hired for. Come out there and ask us how we feel about it. Because you will not get the same response. This is not about jobs. Everyone deserves a job. Everyone deserves to feed their family. Everyone deserves clean air. This is a right that we shouldn't be talking about. Thank you.
Thank you, Shashonda. Destiny Walford and Craig Shaltel. Good evening.
Hi, my name is Destiny Watford. I was born and raised in Curtis Bay, which is one of the most erected communities around the Bresco. and a medical waste incinerator. And I've been hearing a lot of folks talking tonight about cost. And I just want to make it crystal clear about who is paying those costs. $55 million our city and our residents are paying every year in asthma hospitalizations. This was data that was found thanks to the Chesapeake Bay Trust, and that I invite council members to review because it's really important for us to understand just how significant the cost of the incinerator is putting, the burden that it's putting on our health. I also want to make it very clear that the path that we're on when it comes to zero waste, we're already on it. The incinerator is holding us back. We're already, as a city, we've already said that we want to take a path towards zero waste, and we have a plan that we have a plan of action that we want to take. Bresco burns Bresco creates 1/3 of the air pollution in the city. Of that, over 80% of what could be burned could be recycled or composted. Bresco doesn't get to decide what we put into it. We as a city have to make the choice to deal with our waste in an alternative way. That means investing in a structural change when it comes to what we do with our waste. That means investing in heavily zero waste alternatives like recycling and composting, rather than relying on a dinosaur of a development. No offense, guys, but you're a dinosaur. And what this means is that we need to take a zero waste transition in a way that's just and actually meets our needs as human beings. Thank you.
Thank you. Greg Saltel? Okay, he was here, he left, okay. Deborah Kleiman? And then it's Neil Selman.
Hello, thank you for letting me testify. I am the chair of the Greater Baltimore Group of the Sierra Club. And I want to say in 2017, the Wheelabrator incinerated over 705 tons of trash. That wasn't just trash from Baltimore City. Baltimore only accounted for 54% of the trash through public and private haulers. That means 46% of the trash that was burned came from outside the city. It means 46% of the incinerator pollution we breathe came from outside the city. Baltimore County's the main culprit. I live in Baltimore County. Accounted for 40% of the extra trash. But let's not disregard the fact that Anne Arundel, Howard, St. Mary's, Prince George's, Montgomery County sent trash to the Wheelabrator in 2017. Delaware, Pennsylvania, Virginia, West Virginia, Ohio, New York, New Jersey, and North Carolina also sent trash to the Wheelabrator in 2017. These counties and states made Baltimore City one of their dumping grounds, contributing to the mass amounts of sulfur dioxide, nitrous oxides, mercury, and lead in our air. Choosing to keep Wheelabrator around is choosing to harm us and our children with pollution from waste we had no part in creating. I am also a cancer survivor, and I am also an educator in the city. And I see a lot of children out because of asthma and because of other sicknesses that are preventable, at least partially preventable, if we choose another way to deal with our garbage, to deal with our waste, to deal with our compost. We need to reduce. We need to not buy things that are wrapped in plastic. We need to tell Giant and Safeway not to package their stuff. And in New Zealand, they've stopped packaging all produce. I just saw that on the news. And, you know, you just don't do it. Dr. Caldecott from Australia said to unwrap your stuff in the grocery store and leave the waste for the grocery stores, because that's where it comes from. Thank you so much.
Hello. My name is Neil Seldman. I'm with the Institute for Local Self-Reliance in Washington. I'm
speaking to the microphone, Neil.
Thank you. My name is Neil Seldman. I'm with the Institute for Local Self-Reliance in Washington, D.C. I've been studying Baltimore's garbage for many years, and I produced a report 2 years ago, a detailed report on how Baltimore can increase their recycling. I am very pleased to see the frustration on the City Council with the numbers coming out of DPW on recycling. It's probably about 10% if you take away the 5% credit for burning. And I want to point out that in the years I've been sitting here listening to presentations by the director of the DPW, by staff, there is no progress on composting and on recycling. I asked a professional expert on unit pricing, pay-as-you-throw, smart recycling, to run the numbers for this city. If you were to invest in a pay-as-you-throw system, which actually costs you nothing more than you're paying now for collection, you will save, solid waste will go down from a complete reduction of 40%. That means 70 to 80% more, 70 to 80,000 tons per year more recycling. The tip fee in a program like that will be $20 per ton. You are now paying $83 per ton for recycling. If you were to not even invest, even if you would just, the DPW would have a program teaching people how to compost in their backyard, you would save at least $275,000 a year. The final thing I want to tell you is that the DPW people tell you that they have a study, that study will be done in 1 year from now. That study is being done by an agency that promotes incineration. That study will tell you that the incinerator can last another up until 2040. It's just not true, and if you just do what other cities are doing, you will save money and eliminate the need for the incinerator. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Tammy Gaffin. She didn't want to testify. Odette Jones. She's walking down. Come on, it's going to take 2 minutes. Go ahead. You don't have to run, Odette.
Good afternoon, or good evening, councilmen and councilwomen. My name is Rodette Jones. I'm a retired city worker and manager of the Filbert Street Garden. My alternative to incineration in my neighborhood, which is Curtis Bay, is the Baltimore Compost Collector project that we have going on.
You want to lift that up, the microphone? Okay.
Oops. It's going to be my 2 minutes in a minute.
Got it. Go ahead.
Okay. I live in a healthy food priority area. My goal is to increase the availability of local fresh fruits and vegetables in my community, show benefits of gardening in urban spaces and how to garden with limited resources, promote water conservation, composting and recycling, the use of irrigation alternatives, and other practices that lead to environmental sustainability. We have a partnership with elementary schools, high schools, and colleges. Our Baltimore Compost Collective project teaches students how to compost food scraps and turn them into reusable soil that goes through recycle to make compost, which is used for growing healthy fruits and vegetables. The process is sustainable because it teaches students to grow their own healthy food. We also have a residential food compost pickup service in South Baltimore, which is currently run by the high school students and supervisor. We have one commercial account. This program teaches the students to become reliable employees with good work ethics. Clean air and clean energy is our goal. We need clean, unpolluted air to grow healthy vegetables and fruits, to decrease the amount of respiratory problems our children encounter every day on a daily basis in their schools. Going to zero waste.
Rodette, if you have a written testimony.
Okay, going to zero waste, we have to have alternatives. I'm taking the first step to this challenge to make my air in my community cleaner and encouraging the council to pass the Clean Air Regulation Act. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Tammy? Tammy?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the council. My name is Tammy Gappin. I'm representing Climate Reality Project Baltimore, here to support the Clean Air Act. The points I'd like to make are, first, trash incineration is not clean energy. It is a dirty way to make energy and a dirty way to deal with trash. EPA data shows that burning trash releases 2.5 times as much greenhouse gas pollution as burning coal. Incinerators are 50% worse for the climate than landfills. When trash is burned, all of the available carbon is immediately injected into the air, mostly as carbon dioxide, warming our atmosphere. However, when trash is landfilled, much of the carbon is sequestered. Plastics, which are made from oil, don't break down. That carbon stays trapped. The same is true with much of the carbon in wood and other durable materials. It's mainly food scraps and yard waste that break down quickly, forming landfill gas. This is readily compostable material that should be kept out of landfills. Regarding trucking trash, for every extra 100 truck miles, it adds just under 1% to the greenhouse gases emitted. That is negligible compared to emissions from landfills and incinerators. By passing this bill, you have the chance to make Baltimore a leader in providing solutions to the climate crisis. On behalf of Climate Reality Project Baltimore, I support the Baltimore Clean Air Act. Thank you.
Thank you. The last one is Richard Otts, OCHS. Richard? Then that concludes the public testimony.
I've been here for 3 hours.
Did you?
I'll yield to Dr. Du Bois.
What's your name?
Du Bois.
What is it?
Du Bois. I look like Mary Pat Clark, but I'm not Mary Pat Clark. I'm Dr. Gwen Du Bois, president of Chesapeake Physicians for Social Responsibility.
Go ahead.
We endorse strongly this bill. In the 80s, you probably know this, syringes, needles were washing up on the shores. It was early in HIV, and people were very concerned, and that's really when incinerators blossomed. But it turned out in the 90s that medical waste incineration was a major source of both dioxin and mercury pollution. Dioxin is one of the most toxic chemicals known to humankind. It's a carcinogen. It disrupts hormones. It affects immunity. It affects fertility. And a very small amount is very, very toxic. And of course, mercury is a neurotoxic to an infant, fetus, to a neonate, to an infant. When this happened in the 90s and there were better regulations, my hospital, Sinai, I'm a constituent of Councilman Schleifer, mothballed its incinerator and got an autoclave and began separating out its waste. And I can say now Sinai is composting from the kitchen. But Sinai and other hospitals still have further to go because, number one, dioxin comes from incinerators. It comes from the PVC tubing and other plastics, and when you incinerate it, you create in the smokestack the dioxin. So incineration creates something that wasn't there, and autoclaving and microwaving does not do this. But number two, then you need to separate out waste. And when the incinerator first came, and I don't know if they still have a put or pay contract, that hospitals were charged whether they gave waste or not, and there was no incentive to separating. And then the city council had a 240-mile radius, and we were putting other hospitals' waste in the incinerator, and people downwind were breathing it in. I was glad in my neighborhood I wasn't breathing Sinai's incineration air pollution anymore, but but they were breathing it in other places, and it wasn't right. The third thing is you have to change the materials you begin with, and that's what we have to do at Sinai. If you have no place for it, if it ends up as waste, you shouldn't have bought it in the first place.
Okay.
And that's what Sinai needs to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Richard?
I've been a resident of Baltimore all my life. My name is Richard Oakes. I live in Northeast Baltimore. I'm a cancer survivor. My cancer, which is in remission, was traced to industrial pollution. So I'm very sensitive to that. The other point I want to make is that incinerators put out hundreds of chemical combinations that have not been analyzed by the EPA or anyone else. These chemical combinations are not all particulate matter that would be scrubbed by the electrostatic scrubbers. So this report, I do support the legislation, but the bill is not even strong enough because it doesn't even cover the hundreds of chemical combinations that are coming out that have not been analyzed by anyone. Thank you.
Thank you. This concludes public testimony. What? Does the committee have any questions before we take a vote? No? Mr. Chief, for the amendments. You want to?
I'd like. Are you going to read them first?
Huh?
Voting on this as
You do what you got to do. I don't. You heard what the testimony was. You said you were going to support it, so you had questions. So do what you got to do. The thing for the amendments. All right. Do I have there's 3 amendments. Do I have a motion?
I have a motion to accept the amendments.
Do I have a second? All those in favor of the amendment say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Those opposed say nay. The ayes have it. Do I have a motion to move the bill as amended?
Move the bill as amended.
Wait a minute. Who moved it? Dorsey?
Dorsey, second by Clark.
Moved by Dorsey, second by Councilwoman Clark. We're taking a vote. I will explain my vote. As I said earlier at the beginning, I think this bill is basically regards to, it's a health issue, clean air, and we're not here to close anyone down. What we're saying is for the companies to either retrofit or whatever to clean up, or else if you can't clean up, then you move, you close down. Vice Singer votes yes. Middleton?
And I'd like to explain my vote. So there were several key things that really caught my attention. And the young student that spoke and said that we shouldn't be discussing and arguing between clean air versus jobs. I listened to the case on dioxin, and it was mentioned that you could even 50 to 100 miles away. And then also I had mentioned earlier that, you know, it's almost personal to me because my father and father-in-law both left this earth from industrial pollution. My father eventually died from emphysema, and my father-in-law had throat cancer that spread to his lung, and that was, with both of them, that was close to a 5-year experience. And it was caused from pollution from back in the 80s and 90s, from basically from Bethlehem Steel, and also had several family members that lived in Sparrows Point, and as many of you know, they eventually had to close that community. I also have many relatives that live in Cherry Hill, Westport, and Fairfield. And so this is a public health crisis. And you know, as some of the people have mentioned, you know, our jobs are to protect the people of this city. That's one of our main charges and goals. And this Wheelabrator has been given, you know, discussions have been going on for many years. And sometimes you have to play hardball and push the company to make changes. It's up to the company to make changes. And, you know, with what I went through with my father, and he was employed, he was also a worker at this place for 43 years. 43 years. And this is a man that worked 43 years and had never took a day off, because back in those days you worked, and if you didn't work, you didn't get paid. So had very strong work ethics, but he lost his life at an early age. And it was due to pollutants from the place that he worked. And you shouldn't have to make choices like that. So my vote is definitely a yes for this bill.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Councilwoman Clark?
Yes, I vote yes for this bill. And I just like, can somebody grab me a microphone just for a second? It's not easy because there are good people on all sides of this. But unless we take drastic steps in many areas of our lives right now, we're just going to spin around in circles and not make any progress here in Baltimore City. We want to be proud of ourselves, proud of our society, proud of our air and quality of life here. And it's not easy. And for a long time, I've been ready to support this bill. And I do now vote yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman.
Excuse me.
Councilman Costello?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am supportive of efforts to further restrict the 2 incinerators in the city to ensure that we have healthy air for our residents, people that live and visit our city. That said, I cannot agree with the vilification of one entity as being responsible for the air quality issues that we have in this city, especially an 2 entities that are partners to our city and to our hospital anchor institutions. I am disappointed that we have not heard from the hospital community about what the impact on them will be with respect to CBE. I'm disappointed that we have not heard from Veolia as to what the impact on their energy capacity is, considering that they power about 1/4 of the downtown central business district, which I alone represent in this room. I am gravely disappointed with DPW for the lack of fiscal information in their agency comments report, and that much greater detail was provided to the General Assembly and not to the City Council when we're dealing with a decision of this magnitude. Out of deference to the chair and the fact that these 2 facilities are located in the 10th district, I will vote in support of this in committee, but I cannot move further on this bill after a committee vote without a comprehensive fiscal impact statement from the administration. That includes the Department of Finance and the Bureau of Budget and Management Research. And I'm extremely disappointed that the ball was dropped between DPW and Finance and BBMR, and it didn't occur to anyone in the administration that we need that information in order to make a decision of this magnitude. We cannot continue to make decisions on this council without taking into consideration the fiscal impact to the entire city. And we also need to see what the alternative is from DPW in terms of a solid waste plan, because we cannot just take 80% of the waste that the city is going through offline without a plan to do that. And the frank reality here is that switching to recycling tomorrow is not going to fix that. In an ideal world, it would, and that's a goal that we should all be striving for, but it's not going to fix it tomorrow. It's not going to fix it in a year. It's not going to fix it by 2026. So we need to be proactive about how to deal with this waste plan in a very serious way and figure out how we're going to pay for this, because there's some very significant costs associated with this. I vote yes.
Thank you. Councilman Dorsey?
Mr. Chair, I too have had considerations about the fact that we have not heard from the medical institutions in Baltimore, but on reflection have thought, I have never seen Johns Hopkins at any loss for lobbying representation, nor have I seen that for MedStar or the other medical groups in town. These are very, very able institutions that anytime there's anything that they might have a remote interest in, we hear from them very ably. And this is just one of these examples where when I don't see somebody show up under those kind of circumstances, I can only conclude that it's because they don't believe that they're going to be significantly impacted by the outcomes. I believe that Hopkins and others know that they will find a way to make this change work for them. However, we determine the city must go forth. I also want to say I've been to the Bresco incinerator. I was curious about it when I first took office here, and really, frankly, sought to avail myself of some of the privileges of the office, being able to make calls and say, hi, I'm this guy and I've got some title and I'd like to see what you've got going on there. I was interested in seeing what goes on in the Bresco incinerator, and I'm a guy who likes machines, mechanics, and the workings of things, so I was really interested. And it's an impressive facility. And what's really impressive is that kind of top to bottom, folks who work there really care about it and know about it and voice passionately what it means to them, as we heard here today. I took time from before this hearing to introduce myself to some of the gentlemen who are sitting here, and who throughout the hearing I watched, attentively listen to everybody's testimony, and that's not something that we see all the time. Even sticking it out through the whole of a hearing is something that we don't see all the time. But I've also sat in the Sustainability Commission as the City Council's representation on that commission for the last 2 years. And I've also vested my interest in other legislative things that I believe will improve air quality in Baltimore City, and have been fortunate to see the degree to which this matters to people in Baltimore City, my constituency, and have tried in my district to promote and educate about composting and other waste management processes. I'm kind of a nerd about it. I have 4 different composting processes at my house. Worms in my basement. This is something that I have invested a lot of time in understanding, and I absolutely believe that taking bold steps, like forcing really serious change, because that is what our times and our science and our climate and our world understanding is telling us has to be done. It is just what has to be done in order to move the needle in the significant ways that our future demands. And so I have to vote yes on this bill because I think it's the right thing to do.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Pinkett?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it goes without saying that I would imagine that there's no one in this room that's not in support of clean air. And quite frankly, I think it's a shame that for the constituents in South Baltimore that they've had to endure this for this long. You know, these issues should have been addressed a long time ago, but fortunately they're being brought to us today. But it baffles me that an issue of this magnitude, that we could be sitting here without any type of fiscal analysis from DPW that would help us make a more informed decision. It has already been stated by this council and by the community at large that aspirationally this city is moving towards zero waste. And to be at this juncture without a serious plan towards that effort, to be here without a serious waste management plan, and the fiscal analysis that would go into that, I just believe DPW has been derelict in its responsibility to this council and to the city. But having said that, we must move forward, and our citizens are calling for it. Our duty as advocates for our citizens require it. But what I do ask of this council is that we do also have a fiscal responsibility to this city as well. And even if our heart says that making certain that every citizen in the city has the ability to breathe clean air, and I think we agree on that, we still, our decision still should be informed by having the fiscal analysis. So I hope that even beyond this committee, there is some mechanism to get those numbers before us, because that's a part of our responsibility as well. And so having said that, my vote is yes.
So yes.
Someone else?
Thank you. Councilman Stokes?
This is very difficult for me. I represent the 12th district, and I grew up in East Baltimore, 3 blocks from Hopkins, who had asthma all his life, had to rush my son at 2 years old 3 and 4 times a week to Hopkins to put him in a zippered bubble so he could breathe. I'm disappointed because DPW, I said it from the beginning, need to come up with a good compost and recycling, because we would not be sitting here having this conversation. And I worry about these gentlemen, the ones that were incarcerated that have jobs, the gentlemen who served this country and your families, and it puts us in a position that it affects everybody. And I'm really disappointed that we sitting here having this conversation because DPW has not done their job. I go to community meetings, I go talk to seniors, the guys that represent DPW, they do a great job. They say absolutely nothing about recycling. We got young people in elementary schools, we got young people in high schools, they don't even recycle. So that's why we here, because we haven't learned how to do this in Baltimore, so we gotta go out and hire a company who is doing the waste. But if we did the recycle, we wouldn't put these gentlemen that work here and ladies in a position to worry about if they could take care of their families and have a job. So I vote yes.
Thank you, Councilman. So the vote as amended is 7. This bill will come out on second reader February the 4th. Thank you.
Yeah, and then, and